Welcome to Safe on Deck. For episode 41, I sat down with Lieutenant Commander Mike Weipert in Pensacola, Florida. Lieutenant Commander Weipert began his career in the military by enlisting in the Utah Army National Guard. And after 9/11, he changed his college major to Russian Area Studies and Russian Literature in order to commission a semester early. After graduating as the top aviator in his class in Army Flight Training, Lieutenant Commander Weipert was handpicked to fly the RC-12 Guardrail intelligence gathering aircraft. Between 2007 and 2012, Lieutenant Commander Weipert deployed to Iraq for a combined 32 months, where he served as UAV Platoon Leader, UAV Company XO, RC-12 Flight Company Commander, Battalion S-4, Battalion Training Officer, and Task Force Commander. In 2014, Lieutenant Commander Weipert transitioned into the Navy and attended the Texas A&M School of Medicine, where he was selected as a 2015 Tillman Foundation Scholarship recipient. Upon graduation, Lieutenant Commander Weipert attended internship as a transitional year intern at Portsmouth Naval Hospital and trained at the Naval Aerospace Medical Institute before being assigned to Training Squadron TEN as a flight surgeon. Lieutenant Commander Weipert was chosen for a coveted spot in the Residency in Aviation Medicine program, where he currently works as an Aerospace Medicine specialist in the NAMI waiver department. Lieutenant Commander Weipert is designated as a U.S. Navy flight surgeon, a board-eligible Aerospace Medicine physician, and an Army Senior Aviator. And he's logged over 1,500 hours in 12 different aircraft types, including the C-12 and the RC-12 Mike, November, Quebec, and X-ray model aircraft. Thank you for taking the time to listen. In the future, I plan to continue to share similar interviews with both current and retired military aviators. If you have a question or a suggestion for a future interview, please leave it as a comment below. Safe on Deck, episode 41 with Lieutenant Commander Mike Weipert. Enjoy. Doc, sometimes I go back and forth with folks on schedules. You have been nothing but gracious. We finally lined it up. We finally found a time where we could both sit down and chat. So start all these interviews the same way. Wanted to start yours the same way as well. Where were you born?
I was born in Tucson, Arizona. My dad was in law school at the time. It was an interesting time. I don't really remember a lot of it, but if you're familiar with Southern California, I was born in Tucson, then we moved to Brawley, then to El Centro, and then finally ended up in San Diego.
I've never spoken to someone that has lived in Brawley. I've been there all of once when I visited El Centro. I bet you have some stories. That is an interesting place.
I do not remember it very well.
That's probably for the best.
I have some memory about, I guess there was like tomato plants there. I remember we used to get a lot of tomatoes that were misshapen, but I don't really remember. I was very, very young. I just remember it was very hot.
Where was the interest in the military? I'm not hearing that yet. Where was that first touch point for you?
So my dad was not in the military. Actually, nobody in my family was in the military. Both my grandparents were in World War II, and other than grandparents, no military history there at all. But I was a Boy Scout, and when I was a Boy Scout, one of my Scoutmasters was affiliated. I don't think he was actually a Scoutmaster. I think he was just a volunteer that helped out with scouting. He was some kind of jet pilot that flew off the carriers out in San Diego. And so we did some simulator stuff when I was in Scouts. And I thought, wow, this is pretty cool, trying to fly a jet under the Coronado Bridge. It was a lot of fun. I really liked it. And then when I became an Eagle Scout, I actually got to do my ceremony on the USS Midway. So I think back then it was still an active carrier. I don't remember when it switched over from active carrier over to museum, but it was out there. And so I thought to myself, this is a pretty cool thing. I really wouldn't mind flying for the Navy, but I didn't really pursue it because I figured I'd go to medical school. And so if I had any kind of military, push, it would be then, but not strong enough to actually join the ROTC or do anything like that.
Okay. Well, we talked about, before we got started here, we kind of sketched out the career. And one of the things you talked about is doing your undergrad. What'd you get your undergrad in? So
I actually got my undergrad in Russian Area Studies, so Russian language and literature, but that's not what I started off as. I started off pre-med, and I wanted to always go to medical school. It was always the dream. It was everything. But then 9/11 happened, and when 9/11 happened, so to go back just a little bit, so I got married to my wife in 2000, and we didn't have a lot of money. And so one of the things that we did was join the National Guard there in the Army. You could join the National Guard, you could go to basic training, and you could go in between semesters. So I did that. I went and I was a combat engineer. They're the guys who blow stuff up, a lot of C4, a lot of landmines, all that kind of stuff. So I did that so that we could get the GI Bill, so that we could get a little bit of money. And I liked it so much that I thought, maybe we should do this full time. And then 9/11 happened someplace around there, and we decided, okay, we'll put medical school on hold, and then we'll go into the military and go active duty.
How old were you on 9/11?
So I would have been, I think, 22. I mean, if I did the math, I guess 23.
No public math. Yeah, I'm trying to remember where. Do you remember? I remember exactly where I was on that day.
I did. I was actually getting my dental check at the MEP station. So
really?
I was there for the National Guard stuff. So I remember after 9/11, they even sat us down because the way that the National Guard works is they're not really trying to push you through the door like I guess they do with a lot of people. And so it takes a couple times of doing all this stuff. Like you do your dental and you do your medical and you do a couple things and you sign the paperwork. So I remember at the time I was doing my dental from a civilian dentist and we were watching it and I thought, oh wow, that's pretty interesting. And so I took my exam over to the MEP station and dropped it off. Everybody's watching it. It took about 2 or 3 days until eventually we had to sign all the paperwork to join the National Guard. And I remember them saying, do you want to do this? You know we're about to go to war, right? Like, this is going to happen. And I thought, it's the National Guard. What are they going to have me do? Like, I'm going to be in med school. It's not going to be a big deal. It'll be fine. 1 week in a month, but I get that money so I can finish school now. And then I went to basic training and I came back and I told my wife, I said, I want to do this active duty. Like I love the military. Let's do this. And so I went to basic training the whole time thinking, this might be for other people, but I'm just going to pop in 1 week in a month, do some physicals, do some stuff. And then I enjoyed it so much.
What about basic training kind of flipped that switch and made you think, I want to do this?
Basic training was actually really easy. I know people talk about basic training being hard. I graduated number 1 in my class and the drill sergeant didn't even know my name. I remember right before the ceremony, he's like, who the heck is this guy? Who's Private Weipert? And I was like, that's me, drill sergeant. He goes, are you even in this class? I'm like, yeah, I'm here. And so he's like, I never said your name once. And I was like, I thought that was kind of the point. Basic training was really easy. I knew how to shoot from Boy Scouts. I knew how to do a lot of the stuff. I had lived in Russia for 2 years prior to that. And so it wasn't that big of a deal. I thought it was pretty easy and I enjoyed it. I like the drill and ceremony. I like shooting. I like, the Army is really big on ruck marches and they're really big on calling cadence. And I guess you just kind of repeat it enough that you think, this is pretty cool. This is what I want to go do.
Okay, well, you mentioned Russia, and I'm not going to let you get away without at least telling that story. What was it like? You said 2 years in Russia?
Yeah, 2 years in Russia. So growing up, I'm LDS, I'm Mormon. And so I went to BYU, Brigham Young University for undergrad. There's 2 campuses. There's one in Idaho and there's one in Utah. I went to the one in Idaho for 2 years and then transferred down to the major one in Utah. And so I put in my paperwork to go on a church mission. I'm sure you've seen all the people. They wear the white shirts and ties and they knock on your door. And so I thought, that's what I'm gonna do. Russia was very, very distrustful of Americans. They did not like Americans being there, and they didn't want them proselyting. They didn't want them talking about church. They didn't want them talking about religion. And so when I put in my paperwork and I got accepted to go to Russia, they, you tell them where you'd like to go, and then they kind of find needs of the church. And so I got sent there, and they said, hey, they do not want you knocking on doors. They don't really want you talking about Jesus. They don't want you talking about any of that stuff. You're here to be a good example of the church. So I was a high school basketball coach. I was a high school soccer coach. I organized adult soccer leagues, which are football leagues over there. I taught English from elementary all the way up to university level. We cleaned up cemeteries that were dilapidated and we cleaned up headstones. We processed some of their paperwork so that they knew who was actually buried there, because there's a lot of cemeteries that are from like the 1700s that are just kind of in the woods. And so we would clean that on up. I worked at a pediatric oncology hospital. I used to juggle a lot and do yo-yo tricks, and so we would play with the kids, and then we would also help them with their meals. Here in the States, when you send your kid to the hospital, you can come in there and you can visit them, and the hospital staff brings them food. Over in Russia, that doesn't happen. So you've got a kid who's like 4 or 5 years old, and the parents drop off a box of food, and it's like, what is that kid gonna eat? And they don't eat, like Kraft mac and cheese like we do. They would drop off a bag of beans and a bag of rice, and it's like, what's that kid supposed to do? And the staff does not make it for them. So I don't actually know what they do without volunteers. So we would make food for them. We would help them out. I worked at an adult hospital and general like surgery hospital, and one of the jobs that we had in the morning was they would give us stethoscopes, and we would walk around and we would listen to see if anybody had died during the night and make sure that everybody was still alive. Hospitals were very, very different in other countries. We would also be there just to kind of monitor, because you're supposed to provide your own bandages, and so patients would steal bandages from other patients who were there. So they would steal their surgical supplies and put them on themselves. Crazy. I worked at the Hermitage, the museum over there, where I translated to try to get Europeans and Americans to donate money so they could restore some of their artwork. The Hermitage it's huge. It's bigger than the Louvre. They've got way more stuff than the Louvre, but they also have a finite budget, and so most of the stuff is just underground, just in storage, and so they use Westerners and Americans' donations so that they can restore some of those works of art. And so I did that there's a lot of stuff that we did in those 2 years.
Kind of want to hear about the people, because I think a lot of times what no one can see but you and I is one of the things we're using to keep our mic stands lifted up here is a great book on the Russian space program that I think you and I both have enjoyed. But I think a lot of times, well, you know what? Honestly, Dragonfly, that book helped me learn a lot about people. And at the end of the day, technology is technology. We all have that same appreciation for space flight. I think we all, as aviators around the world, we all want to fly, and for those that get to go to space, those folks, I'm sure, love going in space. But I think there's a lot more common between us as individuals and in societies than there is apart. And one of the great joys of the Navy is me getting, all I've ever really been to is Bahrain, but getting to live among those folks and kind of learn a lot about a culture that I knew nothing about. It gave me a lot of appreciation for just how similar we are, as opposed to maybe in some cases how different we are. But I know nothing about Russia. Certainly have not lived there for 2 years. I'm wondering, what did you kind of come back from that trip thinking about the Russian people that maybe you had a misconception or a predisposed notion before you went there, and when you came back you said, actually, this is something that by living there that I now have a lived experience. It's something you could share with others.
So Russia is amazing, and the country is just phenomenal. The buildings, the architecture, the history, the literature. Russian culture is absolutely amazing. I loved every minute that I was over there. The food's amazing. The people are so nice, and they're just fantastic. The government is the most corrupt thing I've ever seen in my life. I can't tell you the number of times that we got, I'm using air quotes here, but arrested and had to give a police officer a bribe. Sometimes we would go from bribe to bribe. We'd get arrested 2-3 times on the street. And one of the classic shakedowns that they like to do is they like to see your paperwork. And so they'll say, let me see your passport. Well, we never carried our passport, because once they have your passport, you cannot get it back. So we had it at the American embassy, and we had copies of it. So then they would tell us that the copies weren't legit. And so we're talking to them, and they say, okay, well, we're going to have to take you to jail. And so the way that they do it for missionaries, for like the structure is, for the first year, you have a senior missionary that you're working with. So you start off just new in the country. You know a little bit about the language, but you're studying and you're talking to people, and your language improves. So you've got a senior kind of companion that's with you. The first time that I was the one in charge, I'd been there about a year, and now I had this brand new kind of missionary out there, and he was looking to me to talk to this policeman. And so the guy's like, hey, I need your paperwork. And I'm like, here's the copy of all this stuff. No, I need to see your real passports. And we said, well, they're at the embassy. And he goes, well, we're going to have to go to jail. We're going to take you down to the station. I said, okay. And the guy looked at me like, okay, I don't think you're understanding this. So we're going to go down to the jail. And I said, yeah, okay. But like, we have a lawyer, like, it's okay. And the guy's like, no. If I take you down there, everybody's got hepatitis. They've got tuberculosis. You're going to get beat up. You're going to get assaulted. Do you really want all that stuff? And I'm like, well, no, I don't. And he's like, so what are we going to do about it? And there's no language barrier. Like, I understand, like, we're talking, but in America, you don't offer a policeman a bribe. And so I'm kind of looking at him like, I don't really know what you want. And so finally the guy's like, money. And I was like, oh, okay, I will pay the fine here on the spot. And I'm like, how much? And he goes, 20,000 rubles. And in my math, I'm thinking, about $1.30. Yeah, here you go. Here's $1.30 so that I don't get assaulted in your jail. Okay, here you go. So like, the government's corrupt. They don't really pay the people well enough, so it's kind of understandable. But we'd go to pay our electric bill, or we'd go to pay our phone bill, and they would say it's $4. And so you would start to pull it on out, and the guy would be like, but you can give me $3.50, and then would wink at you, and then you're like, okay, and so you give him $3.50 in cash, and then your phone bill's done. So everybody skims, everybody's taking bribes, everybody's got some kind of angle that they're working on, and so that's what I noticed about Russia. But the people themselves are great people. I just don't think that their government's very honest with them. Everything's not set up like it is in the United States here.
And again, for someone who's only grown up here and only seen the way that it's done in America, or maybe, it's Western parts of the world, it is incredibly different.
A couple stories. I know we're not here to talk about Russia, but I love Russia. They had a Subway, like a Subway restaurant there. You could get a sandwich at Subway. We went there one time, and we walked by it, and it was Subway, and we thought, well, we're not going to eat at Subway because, we have that at home. Like, we're going to go eat at this food stand. And so we did that. And then we walked by again a couple months later, and we're like, oh yeah, there's that Subway. Maybe we should go in and check it out sometime, but whatever. Then we walked by it a month later. Exact same thing, yellow, green, everything looks exactly like it does on a Subway, but it's called something else. It's called like Minuto or something like that, minute. And I'm like, wait a second, what is going on in there? And so you look in there, everything looks exactly like a Subway. They're even using Subway napkins. They're even using Subway cups, but it is not a Subway. There's things on the menu that are like a little bit different. There's Russian things. And I'm like, how did Subway allow this thing to happen? We talked to a local. Well, basically, they did not pay the mafia their bribe money. And so the mafia just came in and said, this is ours now, get out of here. And they just took over a Subway. And everybody just kind of said, yeah, that's what happens. Just the craziest thing. I mean, you can't go into McDonald's and Gulf Breeze and just take it over and say, this is mine now. And everybody be like, yeah, well, you should have paid people. I had this idea when I was over there because Russia they absolutely love country western stuff. Cowboy hats and stuff like their number one cigarettes are Marlboro cigarettes. And so you see the Marlboro man everywhere. Nobody buys Marlboro cigarettes because they're way too expensive. Like they don't make that much money, but all the knockoffs are all Marlboro. And so that's kind of what they like. They like Billy the Kid. They like the American West. So I had this idea because in college I used to country dance. I used to do country swing and I took third place in a contest. And so I knew how to country swing. And so I said, hey, you know what you guys need over here is you guys need almost like a store, like a Cracker Barrel kind of thing, hardwood floor and stuff like that, put some animals like some elk heads on the wall, stuff like that, play country western music, have like an old timey like looking saloon, and then have like a dance floor that people can dance on, sell steaks and ribs and all this other stuff, just kind of talking at this university level English class. And so their idea is to come up with something like a restaurant, and we're using restaurant terms. So I said, hey, this is the restaurant we're going to talk about, this country western kind of bar saloon, and we used it kind of as an example. Well, then afterwards, this guy walks up to me and he goes, hey, I'd like you to come on over to my house. I'd really like to talk to you guys. And we're like, well, I mean, about what? Like about religion stuff? Because we did talk about religion while we were there. Like if people came up and asked us, we could talk about it, but we couldn't go knock on doors and proselyte. But if they wanted to, we could talk to them. And we still had a lot of members of the church that were over there that we would see and stuff. So this guy wanted to talk, and I was like, is it about religion or something? He goes, well, it's about some things I was thinking about, just some ideas and some things about life. And we're like, yeah, you know what? We've got time. Let's talk to this guy. We go to this guy's house, and I knock on the door, and there's like 20 people crammed into this room. And I'm like, what the heck is going on in here? These are not the people who are trying to talk about Jesus. A lot of vodka being drunk, a lot of people smoking. There's like pickled fish out. And I'm like, what the heck is going on here? And he's like, hey, come on in here. These guys are cool. I'm like, okay. And so we sit down and he goes, so these guys have an idea to open up a country western bar. I'm like, who? Like looking around, and they're like, well, you guys. I'm like, oh, no, I'm not opening up a country western bar. And the guy's like, yeah, you are. You're cool. I'm like, okay. I'm like, if anybody wants to, I don't mind telling you guys how I would do it, but I don't have money. I'm not setting this thing up or anything like that. And the guy goes, where are we going to get the guns? I'm like, what are you talking about? And he goes, we need guns because somebody's going to try to take this over with. So I'll be in charge of the guns. How much can you pay off the mafia to get this permit? I'm like, I'm not doing any of this. I don't know what's going on here. They're talking about how many guns they need. They're talking about the mafia. They're talking about who they're going to pay off. They're talking about all this stuff. And I'm like, it was an English experiment that we were talking about at the university. You guys are nuts. And we tried to get out of there, and they were not happy about it. And so it was a lot of wishy-washy. Oh, well, let's see about this, and then I will never come over by this building again.
In Bahrain, they always used to joke that it's not just a yes, it would be a local yes. They would always say yes to anything you asked because it was a way to keep the conversation going. And yes didn't actually mean yes in Bahrain. Yes meant, let's just keep talking. And in different parts of the world, yeah, it sounds like having a conversation. Oh, you were setting up a business, apparently.
Apparently I was, with mafia contacts and guns and all this stuff. And so it was interesting. It's funny because my wife she just recently owned a food truck. They made sodas, like gourmet sodas and cookies and stuff like that. If you're from around the Utah area, they've got a lot of these places that make custom sodas and cookies and stuff. Her first thing was talking about, well, where do we find the location? Where do we get the food truck? Where do we do whatever? At no time where we talked about paying off the police, getting guns, getting the mafia involved. How do we eliminate our competition? None of that stuff happened. So the people in Russia are amazing. They are just in a very different system.
Okay, let's get you back from Russia. Let's get you back to the U.S. Talked about you started in pre-med.
Yes.
Graduated in something different.
Yes. When I got back, I was still pre-med. I was still going on through. Even when I went to basic training, I came back and I was like, I'm still going to do pre-med. But then when 9/11 happened and everything was going on, I went up and I talked to the ROTC. It's funny, I actually talked to the Air Force ROTC, and the Air Force ROTC says, you can join us, but you cannot fly. We will not let you. We only let people fly who have done it for 3 years or 4 years or whatever, done the whole ROTC program. And so we can't stop you from applying. We're just telling you we will not take you if you tell me that that's your intention to fly, because we don't want you to bump out some of our other applicants. So I said, well, I have no interest in flying. I don't want to be a pilot. I speak Russian. I was going to do intelligence, but I don't like you telling me I can't do something. And so I walked out of there, and then the Army guy said, hey, what's going on over there? Did you sign any paperwork? And I said, no. Nicest guy. We sat on down, we talked about it, and I said, you know what? This is what I'd like to do. And he goes, well, let's put you in ROTC for a year. Let's do 1 year. That's as fast as we can get you out of here. Why don't we switch your degree on over to Russian literature? We figured out that by doing Russian, I could graduate earlier and I could get out of there faster. So we did that. I did ROTC. I did the National Guard, graduated in Russian literature because I tested out of about 60 credits of Russian. You would sit down there, and it was in like this big gymnasium, and you sit there at a desk and they just kept handing you paperwork, and you're like, okay, this is this word, this is that. You're writing essays in Russian, you're doing whatever. And then they say, okay, you are now a fourth year Russian student. You can test out of these 60 credits.
And you are still fluent in Russian, correct?
It's been a little while, but we could get back there pretty quick, especially if NASA's listening. Yes, yes, of course. But what I like to tell people all the time is if we're having a discussion about football, or we're having a discussion about our kids, or about religion, especially about religion, or just, kind of just talking, no problem. If you want me to talk to you about how to rebuild your car, we're going to have a problem. If you want me to tell you how to change the chain on your bicycle, there's going to be a lot of, well, that thing and that guy there and that thing.
Technical language, yeah.
Yes.
Very specific.
So conversationally, yeah, no problem. I can still read it. I can still write it. I can still talk.
That's incredible. What a skill, because there's not that many folks, I'm assuming, that have that fluency.
I talked to some of the astronauts because they all have to learn Russian, usually within speaking for about 30 seconds. They're like, okay, well, why don't we switch back over to English? What is funny, though, is the cosmonaut, they speak English fantastically. They speak English better than I'll ever speak Russian. So while it's important, and I guess it's a requirement for NASA that everybody speak Russian, they're speaking English up there most of the time.
And that is the international language of aviation.
Sure is.
Awesome. Okay, so graduated, and then where are we going next in the career?
So I actually wanted to do military intelligence. That was the whole plan. I spoke Russian. I thought, hey, this is great. I went to a football game at BYU, I think 3 days before I was supposed to turn in my paperwork. I was supposed to turn it in on Monday, and it was a Saturday. And I had already said military intelligence. And the guy next to me just got back from Fort Rucker as a flight student and said, hey, you don't want to do military intelligence. Aviation's the best. You want to do aviation. And I think at the time he even had a cell phone, which is crazy because it would have been about 2003. But I remember him showing me a video of him hovering, and he said it was the greatest thing that he'd ever done. It was just absolutely amazing. And I said, I do want to do aviation. What they do for us is in the Navy, you have to specifically, apply to be a naval aviator. In the Army, they sent us all to this camp over the summer. They basically test infantry skills and just physical fitness skills. At the time, I knew that I needed to be, number one if I wanted to get what I wanted, whether that be military intelligence or infantry or anything else like that. You got to be number one. Otherwise, you end up in like Signal Corps or Transportation or Chemical Corps or some of the other ones. They have brilliant people in all those classes, but those weren't what I wanted to do. And so I graduated pretty much top of my class at ROTC. I was a distinguished military graduate. And one of the things they do is they make, when everybody gets their physical, if you have no problems with color vision and you're 20/20, they send you on over and they make you do a flight physical really quickly. And so I knew that I had already passed my flight physical. I'd already done all that stuff. And so I was like, well, maybe I will. Maybe I'll put in aviation. So I put it in, and that's what I got. I got aviation. So I think I had to take some kind of aptitude test and a couple other things. There was a little bit of paperwork that I had to do. But yeah, I got aviation, and they sent me on out to Fort Rucker, and that's where it all started.
Tell me about Fort Rucker.
It's an interesting place. So Fort Rucker, huge base, and then then around there's like Enterprise, and there's Daleville and Ozark, and then about 20-30 minutes away there's Dothan. We get there, they do it very differently than the Navy does. We had like a 3-week orientation where we had to take like year analysis and do a couple other things, just redo our flight physical, stuff like that. But then they started us off flying. We would fly in the morning, and then we would do API in the afternoon, and then we would switch it up, and then we would do API in the morning and fly in the afternoon. So it wasn't two separate things.
And you say API, what's the term for API?
I don't know what the term for API is, but it's the API term that you guys have here, knife or
like ground school, basically.
Okay. Yes.
So yeah, you're in a classroom.
Ground school.
Okay.
Yes.
Ground school.
So yeah, learning about the weather, learning about aerodynamics, learning about all that technical stuff. But they figured, well, you don't really need this to start flying. So let's start flying, and then you'll pick it up in the afternoon. So we would fly in the morning and take classes in the afternoon, and then it would switch off the next week, and we'd fly in the afternoon and take classes in the morning. They can run 2 classes through at the same time.
The volume there is much different than the Navy, too. There's a lot of warrant officers. There's a lot of commissioned officers, so it's just a lot more people. So they have, I guess, that big demand signal, so that's why they need to do it that way.
Yes, they do, and it's very, very different than they do it here, too. So they didn't trust us to drive to Cairns. I don't know if they didn't have enough parking or if they didn't trust you. I don't know what it is, but the bus would leave. My recollection is the bus would leave every morning at 3:30. So you would have to be there to get on the bus in the morning. I would get up at 2:45, and you would have to be there at 3. So what would happen is there was one bus, and the bus would come and pick people up and then go back, and it would come back and forth. Just being there for the first bus at 3:30 didn't mean you got on that 3:30 bus. And so you would stand in line and wait for that bus to come back, and you would take it again. Sometimes it'd be raining, sometimes it'd be cold, it would be whatever. Then sometimes, if the warrant officers weren't using it and we never knew when, all 3 buses would show up at 3. So everybody had to be ready at all time. Eventually you get over there to Cairns at around like 4:30, and the whole time you're doing EPs and limits, and you're doing flashcards, and everybody's studying. And so you've got classes, not only your class, but the other classes who are farther ahead, who are doing instruments and all this other stuff. So they do all that stuff. You get there, you start doing your brief, you do whatever. I think the old warrant officers come in at 5:30. You kind of brief them a little bit. So they're all civilians that teach us up there, but they're all former warrant officers. So then they would say, hey, let's go outside. And then you go out to the smoking gazebo and finish your briefing as they're smoking and drinking their coffee. And so around 6:30, you start checking out your gear, and about 8 o'clock you'd go flying. And so both of you would fly every single day, and one would fly out, and you'd fly to Andalusia, or you'd fly someplace, and then the other one would fly back.
And you say both of you. In the Navy model, you're going to have usually 2 students and an instructor pilot, so we'd call on wings. Is that kind of the similar model there, two students with an instructor?
Yes, but you have somebody called a stick buddy. And so your stick buddy and you go through flight school together. It's one of those things, if your stick buddy gets a DUI, it's not like you get a DUI, but it's how did you let your stick buddy get a DUI? You both go talk to the general. If he fails something, why didn't you help him out? You get paired up with the stick buddy. So my stick buddy going through was a guy named Adam McCarthy, who I believe now is a nurse in the Army. But basically, we were stick buddies, so we would brief together. We would do everything. If they asked him a question and he didn't know what it was expected that I would know it. Back and forth. We would plan all our briefings together. He was a great guy. Had a lot of fun. And then at some point in time, I switched over, and I had another stick buddy, Dan Wagner, and I was the best man at his wedding. And so brilliant guy. He flew with the 160th, just a great pilot. And one of those guys, you're an instructor pilot, so you probably know, but what I always found funny was this guy had a photographic memory. And so they would say something, and the guy would say, well, what's your, what kind of torque value do you want set at 40 degrees, flying at this altitude or whatever? And he would say it, and he would say 56. And the guy would be like, well, it's a range between like 50 and 60. And he would say, no, it's not. It's 56. And he's like, it's a range. And he goes, I don't think you are recollecting right, instructor. And he would say, oh, really? And he would pull it up, and it would be 56. Like, the guy was never wrong. He would fight you until the end, and he was never wrong. If he knew he didn't know the answer, he would let it drop. But if he knew it and he could see it in his head, he was not going to let you walk away from it. Just a brilliant guy.
What kind of helicopter were you learning to fly?
So I flew the TH-67. I guess here in the Navy, you guys fly the 57. I flew just the other day up at Whiting, and I couldn't tell the difference between the two, but it had been like 22 years, so maybe, I kind of forgot. But yeah, it's same helicopter, same everything. It was great.
Tell me about hovering that first time.
Hovering was interesting. We had this hovering machine that we had inside the library, and it was this weird kind of thing that you would stand on, and it was like a ball with a board across it, and you would kind of, laterally to simulate the pedals, and so you would have to try to balance on the ball, and then they had a joystick, and the joystick could be moved around, and then there was like a plate with a marble on it. And so you would have to try to keep the marble in the center while you were doing that. And then there was something to simulate the collective, another task. And you would have to do all three at the same time. And I got really good at it. It did not translate to hovering. It was, I don't know why they had that thing. But hovering was a little interesting, trying to keep it within a football field. It's just kind of going all over. And then I don't know when it actually happened, but there's just one day when just all kind of comes together and then you don't forget it.
Other than the smoke pit, which is, by the way, where all decisions in the Navy and Army, I'm guessing all the service, that's where the real decisions are made, is in the smoke pit. But other than the IPs in the smoke pit, any good remembrances of those instructor pilots, those grizzled old warrants that are sharing all that knowledge with you?
I will tell you that I almost failed a check ride one time. And what they do is they bring in an active duty person to give all the check rides. At least they did when we were there. I keep saying that they did. This is just what they did for my class. I don't know if I only went through flight school one time, so I'm not sure. But I almost failed this flight. We were flying along, and he said, "Hey, let's turn around and let's go back this other way." And I banked the heck out of that thing, and I stood it up on its end, and then wrenched it around. And the guy's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "That's what we were taught to do." He's like, "Don't ever do that again." And I'm like, "Okay." And then I sat down. I talked, he's yelling at me. And the whole time the warrant officer, or the old warrant officer, my flight instructor, he's like, "Yeah, it's a non-standard turn. You should know better." And then when he leaves, he goes, "What are you, an idiot? You don't do that when you're taking a test." It's almost like when your dad, teaches you how to drive a car. You don't do that on the driving exam. Like, there's driving and then there's taking an exam. And so I was like, "Oh, okay, well, I know." But the warrant officer, the former warrant officers were in Vietnam, and they became civilian instructor pilots. They were fantastic. Except my instrument guy, he was a jerk. This is back before they had all those videos where you could go online and watch like an instrument video and stuff like that. There was a store out in town that was called like Wings and Things or Wings or something like that. And you would go there and get all your EPs and limit flashcards and all your memorabilia and everything.
If it makes you feel any better, I've been there. It still exists.
Yes. So that's there. And so this instructor pilot was very he had this entrepreneurial spirit, and he wanted to make his own set of instructor IFR flight kind of things where he would lecture and he was going to sell it there like, "Hey, this is how you pass instrument portion of flight school." And so we are up there in the soup. I don't know where we're at. And he's recording, and I hear him. So the student doesn't realize that he's off his heading by 30 degrees. And I'm like, "How about you tell me what I'm supposed to do?" And he's like, hey, I'm recording. So the student doesn't realize that he's 30 degrees off because he's following the head when he should be following the tail. And he hasn't set up his VOR properly. And I'm like, "I can hear you over there. You jerk. Can you just teach me? You're the instructor pilot." When I ended up getting fixed wing and going and flying, he didn't know how to do RNAV approaches. And so he asked me, "Can I come on up and fly with you? Or maybe can you take the camera?" And I said, "You can go. You can take your video and you guys can go that way." So I did not like my instructor pilot for instruments, but other than that, they were all top notch. Fantastic.
A lot of times, unless a student is egregious in some form, they do something crazy or dramatic or something in the airplane, we won't really remember them, but they remember every single one of us. Yeah. And if you have an experience like that, they're going to remember that, and they're going to hold it against you. And you know what? You probably, as a student, would have remembered it, and you would have held it against somebody as well. There's something wrong with that. Your professional reputation is so critical. So yeah, maybe don't be filming your video series in flight while you're supposed to be instructing. Oh, good Lord. At the time, second lieutenant, first lieutenant Weipert?
Second lieutenant. Now on the internet, you can see when people make it and everything. But back then, what would happen was whoever it was in your chain of command would get a letter saying, "Hey, you've been promoted." So it was an automatic promotion to first lieutenant. And so what happens is, nobody has their rank sewn on, but first lieutenant is just black. So everybody would take a Sharpie and you would draw it on. And so I remember there was this, he was a captain or a lieutenant in the Navy, but captain. And he goes, "Hey, you're out of uniform. Your letter just came in today. You're supposed to be first lieutenant." And I was like, "Oh, well, I'll run, during lunch and stuff like that." And he goes, No. You just take a Sharpie and black it in." He goes, "I'll help you." And then we walk on in there, we sit down for this brief, and he comes in and goes, "Lieutenant, did you put Sharpie on your rank?" It just calls me out in front of everybody after he had told me to do it. And so anyways, but that's the thing. So no, I distinctly remember I was a second lieutenant because I remember when I made first lieutenant.
Well, you already mentioned it. You already mentioned about going fixed wing. When you finish with, is it primary flight instruction, is that the term we would use?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so done with primary in the 67. Where could you have gone? And obviously you already mentioned you went fixed wing. What were the different options where you could have gone next?
So you finish it through, and when you're done, you get a rank in your class. I graduated, I don't know, I always tell people I graduated number 1 in my class. Don't know if I was actually number 1, but I won the award that you get. It's called the Willie Ruff Award, Willie E. Ruff, and basically it's to the number 1 aviator in your class. So that's what it was. So you finish all that stuff and you wait for your final aircraft. They actually made me prepare people's taxes for like a month while I was on a hold. So when you come on base and it says, oh, there's free tax support, I went through the H&R Blah class and I did people's taxes while I was on a hold. And so they're coming in and they're talking to you as their tax professional, and you're like, I've got a degree in Russian literature and I've had a 2-week class, but sure, let me do your taxes for you.
So I'm going to make a quick pitch for all the ensigns here at Pensacola that are complaining about being in a pool. They're not preparing people's taxes while they're in a pool. So
no.
It could be worse.
Yes. So I was preparing people's taxes. I did that. They would have us do area beautification where they would give you a black trash bag and they would say, you can go home for the day once you fill the trash bag full of weeds. And so you pick them out of the rocks. In the Army, they do a fun thing. If you ever look at an Army base and you turn over a rock, a decorative rock, it will be the same color because you are supposed to turn the rocks periodically so they don't sun bleach. It's a fantastic thing that they do when somebody's got extra duty, is go out there and turn the rocks so they can sun evenly. So there's lots of stuff that they would have you do. I was in this pool, I was holding, and I was waiting to fly 60s, and there was another guy there, and so every day we'd come on in and check and say, hey, so what's going on? I was supposed to fly Blackhawks, and I was trying to do this thing where I could fly Blackhawks in Honduras, and I was supposed to go to Ranger School in between. That was the deal we were trying to work on, was Ranger School down to Honduras flying Blackhawks. But my slot, they didn't have a spot right away, and so I was kind of waiting. We were all waiting, doing area beautification, doing taxes, doing stuff like that. And so I would go in and check all the time. And one of the times I went in there to ask the guy how it was going, he's like really, really mad, and he's yelling on the phone and stuff like that. I'd been there long enough that I knew this W4, and we were just kind of talking, and I said, hey, what's going on? He's like, these 2 National Guard students were supposed to show up for fixed wing, and they didn't show up. And so we got 2 spots down there in Dothan, and they're going to go unfilled, and I'm going to be in a world of hurt. And I was like, oh, okay. And he goes, wait a second, what place did you graduate flight school in? I said, well, I got the Willie Ruff Award. Okay, so you were 1. Do you know who 2 was? I said, yeah, my other friend who's doing taxes with me. He goes, you guys think you can be down in Dothan in the next half hour? And I said, yes, we can. And he goes, okay, you guys are in the fixed wing spot. Grab your friend and get out of here. So I go down there and I go to my first day of flight school, and I come home that day and I'm telling the wife, I'm like, hey, guess what? I'm fixed wing now. She's like, when did this happen? I'm like, well, this is kind of how it worked. So just sheer luck of the draw, being in the right place at the right time. The class in front of us, there was a guy whose dad flew for Delta. This guy had been flying since he was 16. He was all he wanted was fixed wing, but he wasn't number 1 in his class, and he was a much better pilot than I was, and he didn't get it, and so he was super mad. All these people were really mad, and it's being in the right place at the right time.
Absolutely, and it's a great deal, right? Most folks aren't going to get that initial bite, go fixed wing. You're going to have to do something rotary wing, as I understand it, in the Army, and then maybe you're going to have a chance to fly a C-12 at a local unit, or maybe get picked up to do RC-12, and you got it right out of flight training.
In my unit that I was at when I went to 15th of my battalion, there was I think it was 110 of us pilots, and there were 6 of us that were commissioned officers. Well, maybe a little bit more. There's 3 companies, so you've got the CO, you got the XO, and you got 3 platoon leaders, and then you've got somebody filling the S-4 slot, the S-3 slot, and just a couple training slots. So maybe 10 people are commissioned guys, and all the rest are warrant officers. So it just doesn't happen.
What was it like stepping up from the 206 to the King Air?
It was interesting because I think they had us fly a 182 maybe for 5 hours, and they said that's enough, go get inside the King Air, and then you start flying a King Air. I think we got some aerobatic ride in a Zlin, and yeah, I think that was at 3/4 of an hour in a Zlin. So the first time you're flying a King Air in Dothan, you've got no fixed wing time at all. You maybe have 10 hours total in between flying in a Zlin and getting a ride in a 182. But
we're talking about a heavy multi-engine turboprop that you can do some cool stuff in, and you can also get yourself in a lot of trouble in very rapidly as well.
Yeah, and so it was fun. And then you go to Fort Huachuca.
Which I was going to mispronounce that, Huachuca. Okay.
Which I'm sure it's not called Fort Huachuca anymore, because Fort Rucker is now Fort Novosel, which I know a lot of people are talk about the changing of all the military bases and stuff like that. It should have been Fort Novosel a long time ago. Novosel was a great aviator, just an amazing guy. He's Army Aviation. They couldn't have picked a better name name. Like as soon as it was Novacell, oh yeah, okay. But anyways, Fort Huachuca is probably called something else now. But you fly that RC-12 and they put a ton of weight on it. It is very, very heavy. It's way heavier than any civilian C-12. Beefed up engines, beefed up landing gear, everything is beefed up on it. And then you're flying in the high desert, and so it's hot, and you're at a high elevation, and that thing just drops out of the sky, which is very useful when you're trying to land in Iraq and people are shooting at you, that it'll just drop out of the sky. Not so useful when you're trying to learn how to fly a traffic pattern.
So what's the mission of the airplane, the RC-12?
So it has a couple different ones. It has electronic, and then it has signal. So those are the two main things. Electronic, we can pick up anything really that's out there, tanks, artillery, anything with a battery on it. And then signal, anything, walkie-talkies, radios, kind of whatever they want.
Carrier pigeon.
Yeah, whatever they want to do it. And so it's kind of funny because I've heard that somebody said something about bin Laden that he didn't want to use a phone because he knew people were listening. Probably wasn't wrong.
Yeah. So obviously it's going to sound silly, but I'll just to baseline it. You're up front. I'm guessing starting in the right seat and then moving out of the left seat. What's kind of the syllabus to upgrade once you're qualified in the airplane?
You're always left seat flying.
So is it single pilot?
The instructor pilots weren't on the controls. You didn't really learn how to be a co-pilot. You learned how to fly the thing. They would have like a 5-gallon bucket, and you would sit right behind the other two if you were not flying. They would show you how to program everything and do everything, but the instructor was always the co-pilot, and you were always just flying it. And so sometimes too, if you were up in the air and you were doing something, you would swap seats with the instructor so that you would be up there and he'd kind of watch you over your shoulder as you were doing it. But yeah, so you're either left seat flying or yeah.
Is it just a lot of time in left-hand orbits? A lot of time clawing your way up to altitude, spending time on station, then coming back home?
Yes, that's the whole point. Maximize time on station, and then we would have an INS. We would have a couple different things, and so you'd have to learn how to load the box, and you have to learn how to sync everything. The real key is that every time you turn, you lose the capability of collecting. So when you go down your little racetrack, and then you turn, you lose collection, and then you pick it back up on the straightaway. So we would do 50-mile legs usually. So you fly 50 miles down, you turn, you fly 50 miles back. But you can't triangulate somebody's position with only one aircraft, so you have to have 3 aircraft flying at the same time. So you all want to turn at the same time. You all want to maximize where you're at, so just to maximize time on station and to be professional. I don't know how much it really mattered, but everybody had to turn at the same time. Everybody had to do stuff. And you had to fly your tracks. So they would give us pre-programmed, this is where we want you to fly. These are the tracks we want you to fly.
The T6 training airplane, right? Maybe like a 1.5, 2.0 on some of the longer flights. What was a standard flight in terms of duration?
Oh boy, they were long. I would say a lot of the times they were about 8 hours, but not always in the air. So what would happen is our INS would take a long time to spool up. It would take a long time to do all the downlinking and stuff, and so you'd have to be in the aircraft. You would do all that stuff. So maybe you fat fingered it, and maybe you recorded some of the time after a taxi, but not really in the air. But usually like in the air, legitimately flying 5.7 to 6.
Let's kind of describe the crew here. So 2 folks up front. Is there anyone in the back running mission sensors?
Nobody in the back. You're responsible for all of it. And so you would get up and you would flip all the switches. You would do all that stuff. You'd have a little checklist, of everything that you'd have to do. And so,
are we raging around VFR or IFR up in the flight levels?
Oh, completely IFR.
Completely always. IFR. So I've been told I've been told this by Army fixed-wing pilots, but I've been told Army fixed-wing pilots are some of the best at IFR flying because it's just beat into you from day one and very, very good at a lot of practice. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think we're pretty good. But to be honest, I never filed a VFR flight plan in my whole time in the Army. So
never?
It was always IFR. You file it whether you fly it or not, whether it's true IMC, everything's IFR.
Where in the U.S., I'm guessing, did you fly the airplanes around the U.S. at all for exercises or training before we get to our first deployment and taking the airplanes overseas?
I'll tell you an interesting story about the time we saw a UFO. We're flying out over New Mexico. I don't know why, but it's like 3 a.m. and we're flying around New Mexico. We're trying to do this op thing where we're getting ready for a deployment. And so we're out there, not acclimated at all to the time. Like, we shouldn't have been flying. Like, we're both practically falling asleep. He's drinking as much coffee as he can. I'm drinking as much Diet Coke as I can, trying to stay awake. And we're out there, and there's this light above us. I mean, that's like right above us. What is it doing there? Like, there's no TCAS, there's no nothing. Call ATC. ATC says, no, there's nothing above you. We're like looking at this thing and we're like, hey, how dumb would we be if it's a planet or if it's a star or something like that? I mean, there's not a cloud in the sky. And so we're looking and we're like, man, it's tracking, it's moving, it's whatever. And so anyways, the guy I was flying with was so excited because there's a procedure for calling in a UFO, an unknown flying object. And so he does it all up. He calls up, ATC. ATC's like, okay, so something's above you, but whatever. He does his thing and we come on back. Never know what the thing was. I mean, it could have been, we were in New Mexico, so it could have been, some Air Force thing out there training really high or doing something, or it could have been a star, or it could have been a planet. Fast forward about 15 years, something like that. I'm in residency doing aerospace medicine, trying to hopefully get to NASA. I get an email from this guy saying, hey, we are looking for military aviators to come on record and talk about UFOs. And I'm like, it wasn't a joke, but we weren't exactly serious. We didn't see anything going on. And I don't think I would like to do that. I'm in residency. And then after that, then he sends this other thing saying, hey, you're a medical guy. We'd like you to examine some remains. And I'm like, okay, I'm trying to get into NASA. I don't need to be the guy, have a meme where, he's like talking about aliens. So it was just kind of funny because apparently the reports go someplace. And with the Freedom of Information Act, you can look it up. I mean, that's how I assume the guy found out. But anyways, usually we fly in Texas, New Mexico, kind of that area to train. But then our aircraft are hand built. There's only 30 RC-12s inside the Army. So you have to go test them. And so for some strange reason, we have to turn on all the mission gear and we have to listen in and check all the targets. And for some strange reason, we do that in California and New Jersey. While we're waiting to deploy, we would go out there for a couple weeks and we would fly and we would try to pick up targets that were, radio beacons and stuff like that. And we'd fly around. And people in California did not like you there. We'd have to come in civilian clothes because people in the local area would be like, hey, go home, and we don't want you here.
And this is it out in town or just at the airport?
This is out in town. This is Sacramento. We would eat at this Mexican restaurant that was phenomenal. We would always get food poisoning. I know the guy was messing with our food. And so when we would come in civilian clothes, everybody'd be okay. But when we'd come in military clothes, not everybody would get sick, but one person would always get sick. I've never been more violently ill than in Sacramento eating at that Mexican place, but it was fantastic. It was like Russian roulette. You were going to get it eventually, but maybe not this time. So we ate there a lot, but they didn't like us. We'd go out to Sacramento or we'd go out to New Jersey and we'd go fly out there over the ocean and stuff like that. And so if you weren't deployed, you were training up to deploy, or you were out in Sacramento, or you were out in New Jersey.
Okay, so enjoying the RC-12, it sounds like not enjoying the food at certain places. I guess enjoying the food in California, but not enjoying getting sick by that food. What else is going on in terms of a ground job? I know on the Navy side, we talk about, you might be working in scheduling, writing the flight schedule, or in maintenance control when you're a pilot, and then you're also flying as well. What was the other side of that in the Army?
So very, very different than the warrant officer side. So the warrant officers, I remember writing somebody's OER, which is an officer evaluation report, which is kind of like a fit rep in the Navy, which I don't know what the acronym for fit rep stands for, but basically writing somebody's thing, and they would say, well, one of my collateral duties was I filled the refrigerator. And I was like, okay, well, I guess, okay, you did something. So you flew and you filled the refrigerator. Okay. And what did you do? I counted the money from the refrigerator. Oh, okay, so that's a two-person job. Okay, so let's see. The commission side is very different. I was a platoon leader at first, and so because I graduated high in my class, they wanted me to be in charge of the UAV program, so the unmanned aerial vehicles or the drones. So we get there to Fort Hood. The Army has an abysmal record with drones. They crash them all the time. And so they did a really interesting approach. They basically said, well, who uses these drones? Well, the infantry, right? Okay, so let's just put an infantry guy in and here's your drone. Okay, when it's a little handheld throwing little Raven kind of thing. Much, much different when it starts getting bigger and bigger and bigger and more complex. At some point in time, they decided that up to a certain size, sure, an infantry guy can control it. But after that, let's try to get an aviation person. But they didn't have officers that would do that. They would have an aviation enlisted guy assigned to the infantry unit. So at some point in time, they said, hey, these things are getting bigger. They're getting more sophisticated. Let's put them in with the rest of the aviation field. These things would crash all the time. We would crash probably 2 or 3 of them every couple months around the globe. They were just crashing them all the time. They were cheap. Oh yeah, that thing costs, $50, no big deal. Or I'm sure it wasn't 50, but that thing costs a couple $100, no big deal. Eventually, when we got to the point where they started costing $200,000 to $300,000, they started saying, hey, why are these things crashing all the time? Well, at Fort Hood, everybody would stand on the end of the runway, and you would all hold the wings on it, and then somebody would stand there with the little control, and he would max the throttle up as high as it could, and then you would let it go, and it would go down this little pathway, and then he would fly it on up, and then he would fly it over the range, and it was only allowed to stay over some kind of range. And so you would have to put people along the way that could visually spot it and tell you where the drone was going. And then they would put somebody at all four corners, and they would make sure that the thing stayed in the range. Once they got up to 500 feet, then somebody inside this the back of a Humvee would take it over and would fly it remotely. And then when they would bring it back within a mile, and then the guy would go out there with his little controls and he would land it. There was like a little arresting gear, and then people would catch it, and then they would walk it on back. That's how they flew. So not very practical for real aviation stuff. So what they said was, let's stop crashing these things all the time. Let's start bringing aviation into it. And so they gave them to us, this military intelligence unit. We started talking to them. Like, I remember one time the other platoon leader said, "Hey, we're good to go to fly today. The weather's good." And I said, "No, the weather's not good. Like, I don't understand what you're talking about. Like, I just looked at the -1. Like, I'm supposed to fly, and I can't fly in this. How are you guys flying in it?" And she pulled this thing off of Google Weather that said it was sunny outside with wind gusting to 10. And I said, "Oh, we need to have a talk about weather. We will not be doing this." And so once we started looking at it under aviation, it became much, much more professional. And so they were really, really good about it. You know, we had check rides, we had stuff, we brought them all along on the standards and everything like that. So my first job was to be a platoon leader for that unit. There was 2 platoons. There was the maintenance side that would repair them, and there was the aviation side. At Fort Hood, there was a multi-use airport where half of the side was aviation, and there was like an actual Southwest there or somebody like that, but half of it was over on that side, and then the other half was the military side, and we both shared. It was a shared use. And so we would fly RC-12s out of one side, and they would fly the other, use the same runway. We started flying our drones on the same runway too. So we would land like a military plane, and then we'd land a civilian plane, and then we'd land a drone. And so it was a big deal. We didn't use the runway, we used a taxiway. And so that was kind of my first job, was getting the FAA to bite off on letting us fly.
What was it like working with the FAA? Because now you're I'm guessing probably, maybe not the senior Army person, but when they have questions, they're going to come to you. When things don't go maybe perfectly, they're going to come to you. What was that interaction like working with them?
The FAA at the time did not like drones and did not want us there. They thought that it was like this flash in the pan kind of thing, that we were all playing with toys, and they did not want them there. As part of my residency, I went out to CAMI. So we have NAMI, Navy Aerospace Medicine Institute, and they have Civilian Aerospace Medical Institute in Oklahoma City. So the FAA has something very similar. They are all about drones and all about AI technology and automated, and they have really doubled down on, this is the wave of the future. We need to figure out what's going on with flying cars. We need to figure out what's going on with personal jetpacks. We need to figure out with all this stuff. So in the last 23 years, they have changed dramatically, and they're very on top of it. But at the time, they did not want us there. They didn't like us there, and they were just waiting for us to fail.
And I'm guessing you made it work, and what I'm guessing that means is you had to earn their trust and work with them and prove to them that y'all knew what was going on. Like you said, you had, no offense to the infantry folks that were kind of owning the program at the beginning, but now you had aviators, folks that had, actually had their butt in the sky, that understood how to integrate into the National Airspace System and work on that airport. And yeah, right, if one of your drones goes off that taxiway and hits an airliner or something like that, we're going to have a really bad day. You have to earn that trust so you can operate safely.
It also just so happened that I had a platoon sergeant, Sergeant Harold, probably one of the best drone pilots. And I'm not saying that it would have been any different, but there were a couple key people that if we hadn't had them, it would have failed. Just kind of being at the right place, the right time, with the right crew, with the right people. It was a very, very good unit. And I've gone back and I've seen the unit since then, not being as integrated into it, but a lot of young junior guys, whereas a lot of the people that we had, they'd been doing it for like 10 years. They'd been coming up through it. It was the right group to do it. And then once the FAA allows you to fly, it's much easier to maintain it than try to break into it. They're still flying now to this day on the same airfield.
That's awesome. To quote a recent documentary on naval aviation, it's not the plane, it's the pilot, right?
Yeah.
In this case, it's the people. Yeah, if you don't have a good team, it's never going to work. Okay, back to the RC-12, let's talk about that first deployment.
So the first deployment, I went over to Iraq. We went over to Balad. So Balad is or LSA Anaconda is what they call it. It's the only place that has a long enough runway for us to actually fly to.
How long of a runway did you need?
The aircraft itself is top secret. So it needs to be away from everybody. It needs to be you need to have your own hangar for it. It needs to be able to there's lots of things that it needs. And so Balad was kind of the only place. I mean, yes, we could have landed in Baghdad. We flew all over the place, but Balad was kind of the place that we needed to be at. It was kind of an interesting unit too, because I was the company commander of the flight unit, which is really funny because it's essentially kind of the same job that the skipper does here, but they make us do it as like junior 03s. And so I had like 88 warrant officers and 12 planes and stuff like that. And it was like, hey, you're in charge of aviation. Get on over there to Iraq. You go make it happen. And so we brought a lot of pilots. We brought a lot of maintenance guys, even though they were contractors like Dynacor. But the majority of my company was actually translators, and they were back at Fort Hood. So we would broadcast everything real time over a satellite. So we would fly while they were back in Fort Hood listening to everything and writing up all the reports. So forward, it was a smaller footprint because there weren't very many of us. And yes, a lot of contractors. Balad was a good place because we had to have a skiff on the airfield. As the company commander, you're in charge of the skiff, which is hilarious because it's made out of like 2x4s and like old pallets, but that's the skiff. And then they would have to link the airplane to the satellite, which is also great too for OER fit rep for your officer evaluation, is that you get to write down that you're in charge of the $1.3 billion satellite. Even though you're not really in charge, the contract is under you. And so I remember one time there was a property book person that thought it was a satellite dish. And so they came around to inspect and they wanted to see the satellite. And we're like, it's up there.
You got a good set of binoculars.
I haven't personally inventoried it, but I'm pretty sure it's up there. So yeah, you've got this skiff. They have to link everything up. Everything has to go there. And then the planes all have to link to themselves. And so you kind of need a spare space. So Balad is where we were.
But we don't just flip a light switch. The airplanes just don't show up in the AOR. Were the airplanes already over there and you guys just cycle people in and out? Or did you have to move the airplanes over?
No, so it worked both ways. So somebody has to fly the airplanes over there. At the time, when I went there for the first deployment, I was junior man, like low man on the totem pole, and the flight over is always like the best thing. Well, the flight back is better than the flight over, but it's always, the best thing. And so when I first got there, because I was working with the UAVs, I just got on a plane and flew on over there. So you fly on over there, you start setting up all the UAVs, you do everything like that. We were only supposed to be there for 12 months, but we got stuck there for 15 because we were part of the surge. So while we were setting up all the UAVs, they were flying the planes on over. But on the way back, everybody likes to cut loose and likes to have fun. And I am positive the only reason why my name got on that flight back home was because I'm Mormon and I don't drink. And they wanted to tie one on the way home. And so I was the babysitter / designated driver on the flights home. I never flew over to Iraq, but I flew back on all the flights. And those are 3 weeks to 4 week just boondoggles of
just, oh man, we broke down in Germany. I hate when that happens type thing.
Yeah.
I can only imagine, you mentioned the surge and how busy things were. And you talked about, like you said, that data was passing through y'all back to home. But what was the connection like to the battle space itself? You talked about Balad. I'm guessing it was an incredibly busy place. What did it feel like being part of such a massive operation at the time?
So it was really interesting. So we would always make fun of the Air Force guys. They would be out there and they would do this quick reaction force. The Air Force kind of owned Balad. But when the Air Force was flying, they would always say, they'd shut everybody down. We have to sit out there. So it's like 120 degrees in this thing. And most of us are wearing like heavy gear because we're about to go up really high where it's going to be cold. It's just brutal. It's so hot, and you're waiting for these stupid F-18 or F-14s to take off, or F-16s, right? I think that's what they were flying, yeah. And you're like, listen, you're not even dropping bombs. You're not fighting anybody up there. Like, get out of the way so we can do our work, because the Army's the one who's actually doing the work here. You guys are just burning jet fuel, and you guys are delivering mail. Like, get out of the way and let us do our job. It was kind of this weird thing where when you would take off, you would just start to spiral right away. They would try to keep you over the airfield until you got up to about, I think, 5,000, 6,000 feet, and you were out of small arms fire. And then when you would come in, you would just drop out of the sky. You'd slip it, and you'd pull all the power, and the thing would just fall out of the sky. It was to try to keep away from all that small arms fire. But once you're up at about 5,000 feet and you're taking off, going on up, that's pretty much about it. It's time to pull out a magazine or pull out your Stars and Stripes, newspaper, and you'd bring food and you'd fly. And I was trying to go to medical school at the time. I would pull out my books and I was studying, and I was taking classes while I was over there to try to knock out some prerequisites. But once you got up there, you were kind of just off on your own. You're talking to the other guys up there. They're playing trivia games. You're doing whatever, and it's nice and easy. And then you come back into it, and you're falling out of the sky, and people are shooting, and you're getting on the ground, and then you land, and then you go play Call of Duty, work out at the gym.
And was it a pretty nice base? I'm guessing. Did you ever leave Balad the entire time you were there for that 12 or 15 months?
Yeah, so I was on this boondoggle. Anytime there's a way of like doing something shady, some possibility of shenanigans, I'm like all involved in it. So I was looking and I saw that they had this thing called Foreign Money Officer. I don't remember. It's called the FOO, the FOO, whatever that acronym stands for. But I went to the class, I went to the training, and basically what they do is they just hand you bricks of cash, and you're supposed to spend it in the local economy. If you're driving your Humvee in a convoy and you hit a goat, you have to pay for the goat. But not only do you have to pay for the goat, but you have to pay for the goat's offspring and then offspring. So you got to pay for like 3 or 4 generations of goat. So you hit it, farmers out there or whoever it is, he's out there yelling at you, and then they wave and they say, "Hey, Foo, get up here." And the Foo comes up there with a stack of money and says, $8,000. Here you go for your goat, or whatever, 4,000 or whatever, winning hearts and minds. So I had this thing, and we could basically buy whatever we wanted if we could justify it. Flashlights would go out, and stuff like that. And so somebody said, "Hey, every pilot should have a flashlight, just to have it." So of course, if it's going to be a flashlight, you're going to go buy a Surefire, nice flashlight. And so it's like, "Hey, Foo, go break off 10 grand and go buy everybody flashlights." Well, I'm going to have to go take a plane, and we're going to have to go down to Kuwait. But we'd fly down to Kuwait. We'd go into Ace Lumber. We'd spend like 30 grand in cash, buy all of our stuff, put it in the back of the plane, and then we'd swing by the Air Force Base. We had like 5 or 6 like just ice chests that we would fill up with milk and like Snickers bar. Like the Air Force ate like kings. Those guys were ridiculous. And they had real Diet Coke where we had Coca-Cola Light. And so we would load these ice chests up with all this food, and we'd come back and it's like, here's a flashlight and here's a chocolate milk and here's whatever. And so one of the times we went down there and bought a gator, the UAVs, you either had to hand walk them or you had to tow them with a gator. So it was a legitimate purchase. Did we need one that had a stereo system and air conditioning and an extra row of seats?
It's hot in Iraq.
Sure.
Let's think. It's extra, so you need to get all the people out there. I'm thinking of legitimate reasons, Doctor.
Sure. Lots of legitimate reasons.
Maybe not the music.
So you go take 50 grand and you buy a $50,000 gator.
It's a car. That's multiple cars.
That's more expensive than F-150. But you got to buy it, and somebody has to drive it up to Iraq from Ace Hardware. And it wasn't me. So they take it on up there. But one of the funny things about it is when you go to sign out all your money, you go into this like small like little room, and there's like a private in there, and then there's like $10 million in bricks. They're bricks wrapped in cellophane, and they're just behind like this like wooden door, and you can see them over there. One of the guys would get up and he would go do the paperwork, and you always have to have 2 people with you when you're signing out money. So there would be this warrant officer that I was with, and I would always kick him, and I'd be like, "We could take this guy. We could totally take this guy." They wouldn't even know. We could take this guy. We could handcuff him up. We could put him under the desk. By the time he knows we got $10 million, we're running out to the C-12. We'll get in the thing and we'll go to Kuwait. And he's like, Stop. We're not doing that. And I'm like, come on, Joey. Like, we could totally do this. Like, it'd be so easy to do. And the guy's just over there laughing because you're not getting out of Iraq with $10 million.
Not even
close. It just is what it is. So you see all these bricks, you see all this money. And so I did leave a lot to go on boondoggles to spend money all around.
And one thing that I thought was very interesting, my first time in Bahrain, going to the souk, kind of downtown. It's kind of well known. A lot of shopping there, a lot of great, I bought my wife engagement ring, wedding ring, the diamond, all that good stuff. And I'll never forget going into the souk and hearing one of the merchants kind of haggling with someone and saying, "Oh yeah, it's only 3 days a year per diem." And I remember thinking, how do you know how much we're making in per diem a day? How do you know that I'm in a unit that's not based here, that I'm in a unit that gets per diem? Yeah. And it really helped me appreciate how we talk about winning hearts and minds. And we've had a long, very friendly military presence there in Bahrain with the Bahrainis and all that part of the world. But they know very well.
So we went to Qatar, and when you go there, you got to go to the Pearl guy. And so you would land, and then the people there, they would say, "Oh, hey, have you gotten your wife pearls yet?" And you'd say, "No, I haven't gotten them." And so they drive into town. You go to this pearl guy, and I guess whatever nice pearls are, I know Mikimoto, I guess, makes nice pearls, but they're super high quality. They're worth like $5,000, and he sells them for a couple $100, but very, very similar. He would be like, "Oh, so where are you coming from? And what do you fly? And what do you do?" Like he knew what you were there for. He knew all that stuff. He was the pearl guy. And so anyways.
What about flying the airplane in the weather? I'm guessing you talked about that circling approach into and out of the airfield, but I'm guessing also in that 12 or actually 15 months that you were over there, it's probably not all beautiful weather every day.
It wasn't that bad. I know our biggest thing was the heat. It would get too hot to fly. That RC-12 just wouldn't fly. And so you would have to do your performance planning.
When you say too hot, can you put a number to that in Fahrenheit or Celsius? Just big round number?
Some days it'd be 120, but the airplane's much hotter than that because it's sitting out there and it's black. If anybody's listening to this and you want to know what it's like, it's called an RC-12 Guardrail. If you look it up, it's this aircraft that looks like a porcupine, all these antennas, a lot of black, and it's so stinking hot. You do your computations, you could fly, and we would have to go get, the CO to buy off on it. But you would know that if you lost an engine, you were coming right back. There was no turning around. It's like, we lose an engine, we're just falling out of the sky. It's war, so he signs off on it, and that's what you do. Our biggest thing was heat. The other thing too was we had the burn pit there on Balad, the infamous Balad burn pit. You could see that thing from 50 miles away. So if it was a nice clear day, you'd be like, oh, we're flying over there to the burn pit. Like, we can do a visual from here because we know where it's at. The weather wasn't really wasn't all that bad. I mean, it actually was pretty nice. It snowed one time in December, but I remember thinking, this is really weird. It snowed. I guess it's the first time it snowed in like 50, 60 years. And so that was the big joke was, I thought we had global warming. What's going on? It's snowing in Iraq. But it didn't stick. It didn't do anything. You would get all the rain in like 5 or 6 days. It would all come, just a really heavy wet season where the whole base turns into mud, and we didn't really fly during that. And then anytime you get a haboob, one of the big sandstorms that would come in, that would shut everything down. And so that's always everybody's favorite is you take a picture of your buddy standing next to you and you can't even see him. You're like 3 feet away.
In Bahrain, I remember the first time it rained, that was my first deployment. I want to say like November time frame. And yeah, people were out in the streets taking pictures and video because it just does not rain often, and when it does, it happens all at once. Yeah. Same with the haboob, like, yeah, that's a giant dust storm. Let's get everything inside now, because by the time it gets here, you're not nearly as bad as I'm told as what's going on in up north in Iraq. But
now the weather, flying home, because for whatever reason, it seems like we would always come home at around December time. The weather coming home is always crazy, like Greenland, Iceland, Scotland, just crazy weather, and so that was fun. One time we landed in Prestwick. If I remember right, I want to say that we had an 80 knot headwind. It was 100% right down the pike, and we didn't have any other place to go. Apparently we had one of our tires, because it had gotten so cold, something had happened, and so we had a flat tire and we didn't realize it. Like, it was legitimately flat before we landed. Like, I didn't pop it. It was flat before we landed, because you do have these like little mirrors that you can see on the engine. You can kind of like look under there and see your landing gears. And so we had a flat tire, and I remember thinking, like, bracing ourselves for it and saying, okay, this is going to be really crazy because it's raining. It was like hailing, and we had this headwind, and we touched it down, and the second we put it back into idle, the plane just stopped. It was just there. We had like it was 80 knots. We were going like 120, maybe we were going like 110. We landed, and then it was just like stopped. Like, I'm surprised we didn't go backwards on the runway, but it took forever to taxi because we couldn't really turn, and we had the flat tire. One time we landed in Greenland, and it was negative 50. We couldn't get out of the aircraft. So we had frozen ourselves in there solid. Somebody comes on out, and then they take a blowtorch, big propane kind of thing. I have one at home for like killing weeds with, so it's not like it doesn't focus a lot, but it warms things up. And so he spent maybe about 5 minutes warming up our door, and then we were able to get out. And up there, they don't refuel. It's up to you to refuel. And so I was the one commissioned guy, and so I was trying to like lead from the front. And so I'm like, I'm going to go refuel the planes. You dump in a ton of Prist and you refuel them. Everybody's growing a mustache because it's a deployment, and your mustache is just frozen solid with snot. It's so cold. The second you walk out, your nose starts running for like maybe 10 seconds, and then it's all frozen. You're picking like ice cubes out of your nose. I'm out there, and I'm refueling our plane, and I refuel everybody else's planes, the other 3 that were out there, and then I get back inside, and we can't get the door to close. You have these like little windows, and I think there's either 5 or 6, but they all have to be in the green. 3 of them are in the red, one on each side, and then another one, and it's in the red, and we can't figure out how to get the thing closed. I'm like pulling on it, and I'm trying to do it, and as I'm trying to turn this handle, I feel like the handle had totally like bent, and it was coming back, and I'm like, this is about to snap off in my hand. It is so cold. And so we had to have him come back, and he had to heat the door back up again so that we could do it. And we could never get two of them latched. So we have, I think we might even had 5. I think it might have been 2 on each side, 1 on the top, but it might have been 3. But the bottom 2 were not latched. And it was like, well, what are we going to do? We're not going to stay here in Greenland forever, so we got to take off. And so it held pressure on the ground, and so we just basically put on our oxygen masks and buckled in and took off and landed in Canada okay, and it wasn't an issue. But the weather was always a little weird going around there, but not so much in Iraq. I don't really remember the weather being that big of a deal.
Okay, talking about weather, talking about flying, I'm guessing there's a little bit more to it. Any memorable assignments during your time?
So it's not a flying assignment. It's the worst job that you can have as an aviator, and it's a ground job. What happened was we were flying around and we were getting bad guys all the time. So what would happen was there would be like Navy SEALs on the ground, Green Berets, Rangers, they would be whatever. They would say, we're looking for this signal, we're looking for this person, we need you guys to go find him. We were finding people left and right. And like as a pilot, we were just flying the plane. It was the guys back at Fort Hood, the guys who were managing everything, they were finding it. But they would give us what they were looking for, and that's more kind of classified, what they were looking for. But we would go find them. And then they would kick in the door and they would get the guy. The drones were great because our drones would fly and they would like watch them kick in the door and bring this guy out. So people in the States could see it. We caught a couple memorable guys. Like my favorite is we caught Saddam Hussein, not the Saddam Hussein. Apparently it's a pretty common name over there. So it's almost like saying you beat Michael Jordan at basketball and then you pull up a picture and it's this like 40-year-old fat guy from down the street named Michael Jordan. So we caught Saddam Hussein. That was like our claim to fame. But we were constantly clearing people off the top 10 most wanted list every day. So there would be a point in time where one time I think we caught 8 people off the top 10, and then the next night we caught the other 2, and so they had to like make a new top 10 list. And the best part about it was because we had the drones that were flying too, we could say we caught this guy, and then they could actually see the video of us kicking in the door, getting him out, and doing all that stuff. So we didn't do the stuff on the ground. We just provided them the location and did all that stuff. So what would happen was we would write up these briefs, and they would sometimes go up to our battalion, who was not aviation. It was a non-aviation battalion. It was military intelligence. And they would go through them, and then they would go right up to the White House. There was times when the president would be referencing some of the guys that we caught, and our brigade did not like that. They did not like the fact that they didn't understand what we did, because we were aviation assigned to this military intelligence unit, and they were all hardcore military intelligence guys, and they didn't know what we did. So after they would get calls from the White House saying, hey, I need to know what's going on about this particular guy, the brigade commander wouldn't know, and he'd have to call back, and there'd be some lieutenant saying, oh, sir, last night I caught this guy, and blah, blah, blah. He didn't like that. So they wanted us to do this job where they would send an aviator down, take us out of our flight suit, put on regular uniforms, which I didn't even bring to Iraq. I only brought flight suits. I had to go buy one at the PX. And then they would go down there, and we would have to sit in their briefs, and we would have to tell them about the people that we got in Balad. So we're in Baghdad at this castle, or not castle, but this palace, briefing this 06 so that he can go brief his boss on the guys we got. It could have been a phone call, but it wasn't. And so we had this job for like 1 month at a time. We were flying pretty much 24 hours up in Balad. One time, our guys were supposed to be down by 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock, but the airfield went red because they were getting mortared, which happened all the time. If you weren't mortared in Balad, there was something wrong that day. Like, you were always mortared. It just very rarely hit anything. So the airfield's red. They're getting mortared. It's about 4:30, 5 o'clock. They hadn't landed yet. No big deal. They were just holding and waiting to land. It's time for me to go home for the day, so I go on home. This happens every single day. They land at around 5:30, but they might be a little bit later. They might have to divert, they might have to do whatever. But then a couple hours later, the next crew's landing, and then a couple hours, the next crew's landing. So it's 24-hour ops, and there's one guy recording, and so they compile all their information, and then I tell him in the morning. So I checked out a VHS copy of Columbo, and I'm watching it on my TV, and some guy comes running on up, banging on the door, and they're like, there's a situation, you got to go. And I'm like, oh man, a plane just crashed. We just had something happen, something bad just happened. So we come running on down there. I was told to report directly to the brigade commander, and he wants to talk to me like right away. I take a second though before, as I'm walking on through, to run over to my computer, say, what happened? And the guy's like, nothing. I'm like, did anybody crash? No, what are you talking about? And I'm like, okay, so maybe this is something different. So I come walking in there and I'm like, hey sir, what can I do? And he's like, well, you can wipe that smile off your face and you can stand there at attention. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, what happened here? And he goes, how dare you go home when we have aircraft in the air? And I'm like, well, sir, we have aircraft in the air all the time. Like, it's only me down here. And I thought my job was to report on what we caught. I'm responsible for those aircraft. I'm the boss. I said, okay. And he goes, why didn't they land at 5 o'clock? The flight schedule said to land at 5 o'clock. I said, the airfield was red. And he goes, and they just decided they were just going to hold? I said, yes, sir. And he goes, they didn't ask me for permission. I signed the flight schedule that said they were going to be down by 5 o'clock. And I said, sir, but the flight schedule turns into toilet paper when we're in the air. Like, I don't care. I'm going to blow my nose with it. I'll do whatever. I'm going to land when I land. I'm the one flying. I'm the one in charge. No, you're not. You're not in charge. I'm in charge of that aircraft. I said, you're in charge of the aircraft when it's on the ground, sir. When it's in the air, I'm in charge of it. And he goes, you are just an arrogant little piece of crap. And I'm like, sir, you can, whatever you want, but you're an on-flying military intelligence guy. I'm an aviator. Like, when I fly, I'm in charge of the thing. And he goes, I'm going to show you who's in charge. So I did that job for about 3 months. That was supposed to be a 1-month job. And every day he pointed out how he was in charge. I was a military officer first and an aviator second. He made me work on maps, made me plan convoys, made me do MI work until eventually my boss was like, hey, listen, you can't stay down there any longer. He's got to come up or he's not going to hit his minimums and he's not going to be current. So you got to release him at 90 days. And so he let me do it. That was when I decided I was going to go to medical school. Because when you're in the Army, you eventually get to the point where you get a job that's a non-flying job. And I never wanted that to happen. And so I started looking into medical school. I actually wanted to go to PA school, but they told me I had to do my whole 8-year commitment, and I was at like 6 years. So I figured if I was going to take 2 more years to get all the way through, I might as well finish all my prereqs and go to med school. But that brigade commander, that 06, is the very reason I left the Army and became a doctor.
We talk about lessons in leadership and being examples of good leadership and bad leadership. That's a pretty interesting example. And like you said, you told me the story. I'm sure you've told other people that story with someone that didn't understand what y'all were doing, maybe a little bit of arrogance on his part, and he made a really serious career decision for you. And I would argue it probably turned out for the best.
It turned out fantastic.
Yeah, but man.
What I always thought was funny was his dad was a pilot. And he didn't like his dad. Dad and him really butted heads. And he tried to become a pilot and did not make it through the medical portion. And so he didn't like that. But his dad flew for like the airlines. And so he had told me about it, and he had said that he'd even told me how much he hated his dad or disliked his dad, that he was this arrogant guy that thought he was the best because he was a pilot and stuff. Every time I saw him, I asked him how his dad was doing.
Twisting the knife a little, I'm guessing.
I'm like, hey, how's your dad doing? Where's he flying to and stuff like that? I'm like, I'm just interested about aviation. It sounds like he's got a really cool job.
Again, yeah, you can be a good person and look after your people, or you can choose to make different decisions. And I wish he had chosen to look after you, because you know what? You were looking out for your pilots, right? You were looking out for your warrants that were in the sky that day. Yeah, there's only one of you to run everything from your perspective. It wasn't like you were trying to do some scumbag deal. You were doing the right thing, and he, for some reason, didn't want to understand that.
I will tell you, though, that it is very different in the Navy than it is in the Army. In the Army, the aviators are embedded with the rest of the unit. You have all these enlisted guys. You have everybody with you, and you get to wear a flight suit, and they don't. The Army has done has gone to great measures to try to make everybody look the same. They got rid of our one-piece flight suits. They made us wear 2-piece flight suits. So you go to an alteration shop and you get them to turn your 2-piece into a 1-piece flight suit. You had to wear an M9 the whole time. So everybody's got an M9 on like their hip, but we say, hey, we can't put it there because we have flight controls. So we wear them around our waist, and we go get the leather ones where you put bullets in the loops, and like everybody's quick drawing with their M9. Just because you can. I will tell you that Army aviators are some of like the most arrogant people. I mean, maybe Navy guys are too. I haven't really seen it because I haven't been around it that much. We would talk about everybody's motto. Everybody has a motto. The Army aviation motto is above the best. You've got the best, and we're above you. I would say that Army aviators, their heads are like probably 2-3 times too large, which is okay, but you kind of grow out of it, and we're all young at the time. I would argue that doctors are more arrogant than pilots, but it's a pretty crazy group.
That is a perfect segue because that's what we're going to talk about next. You also mentioned before we started recording there was a little bit of a story about going from the Army to med school and then going to the Navy. I was hoping maybe you could tell that story.
Yeah, so at some point in time, what ended up happening was I reached out to my detailer and I told my detailer, hey, I'm thinking about going to become a doctor. Still like to stay in the military, still like to help out. You know, we have a shortage of military doctors and stuff like that. I have no intention of getting out of the military. And the guy says, hey, I can do it, but it's going to be career suicide for you because I'm going to have to keep you there at Fort Hood so you can take organic chemistry at night and you can take all these other classes. Just know that if you don't get it, you're done. I mean, you're done with your career because you haven't done the things you're supposed to do. I said, that's okay. I'm going all in. So one of those times when I was out at Sacramento, we flew all night and I think we landed at like 4 a.m, maybe 5 a.m. And I took my MCAT at 6:30 the next morning and I fell asleep. I scheduled it out there in Sacramento. I flew all night and then I fell asleep. And there was like a proctor that came by and like tapped me on the shoulder and was like, hey, do you want to be sleeping during your MCAT? And I'm like, no, thank you. I'm awake again. So I did everything around the military. I would study while we were in Iraq and all this other stuff. But my detailer said, yep, go for it. I applied to Texas A&M. I didn't get in the first time. And then I went and met with them and they said, hey, you know, there's some things that are wrong with your application. They ask you like what leadership roles you had. I was like the vice president of the juggling club and I put that down and then the lady's like, no, you can put your military. Like we say college, but put down that you were a company commander and a task force commander and put down that you were, you know, all the stuff in Iraq. You're okay. So then when I applied again, I got in. I had my acceptance letter and I went to the Army and I said, hey, you guys told me if I get in, I can switch branches. I submitted my packet up and it came back as denied. And for whatever reason, I never know. I heard that one of my friends at the Pentagon had kind of pushed it through and they skipped a step. And when that guy found out they skipped a step, he got mad. I really don't know what happened. But basically the Army said, no, we're not going to let you go. So one of my friends at church, he was in the Navy and he was doing the Navy program and said, hey, you know, what about going and applying to the Navy? So I called the recruiter up. He said, yeah, we'll take you. So they switched me from the Army to the Navy. The whole time I'm getting out, everybody in the Army is like as mean as they can possibly be about it, just giving me crap about it. All the warrant officers telling me that they wasted all this time, you know, they wasted all this flight hours on me, they did all this other stuff. You know, if you were just going to give up and get out, then, which is funny because they didn't say it about anybody who was actually getting out of the military. But anyways, it was just a big kerfuffle. They actually made me wait a whole year. A&M was nice enough to like hold my spot for a year while they kind of played around with me and got me out. At some point in time, the Army was super nervous that I was going to leave and cut ties with the military altogether. So they had me sign my DD-214 after I had signed my acceptance letter into the Navy. So I had to enlist in the Navy before I could sign my DD-214 in the Army. But I enlisted and they made me an E7 and I was technically what they call a recruiter. I went through medical school as an E7.
What was it like on the Navy side? Were they very welcoming? Did they want you to be part of the program?
As nice as could be. What's funny about the program is you have to take a physical fitness test and you have to take a urinalysis and you have to do stuff like that. They made sure that nobody failed anything. And I probably shouldn't say it on the podcast, so I won't. But the standards were incredibly relaxed and incredibly whatever. They were very, very cognizant of the fact that if I failed that PT test or I failed that urinalysis or I failed whatever, I would have a free medical school degree and I could walk away from the military. So they made sure that nobody failed anything. But yeah, the Navy was super welcoming, super nice. It was a great experience.
So from the Army to the Navy, but in the middle, there's medical school. I have never spoken to someone that's gone through medical school. I want to know all about it. What was I'm going to say specialty. What did you specialize? Was it internal medicine? Again, I'm so far in front of my skis, it's not even funny here, but what was medical school like?
So here's the thing about medical school. I always joke around that any pilot could be a doctor, but not every doctor could be a pilot. It is essentially like ground school, but for 4 years. It is essentially flight school, just getting the crap kicked out of you for 4 years. That's pretty much all it is. And it's every single day getting up and doing it. I would get up every morning. I want to say 5. My wife is probably going to listen to this and be like, it was 6 o'clock. But I remember it being 5.
It's your story. You can tell it however you like.
Yeah. She's not here. But I remember it really early. I'd get up for 2 hours and I'd study. And then I'd drive on up to work or drive on up to the campus. And while I was driving, I would be listening to like my textbooks on tape or lectures or whatever. I would sit through the lecture for about 2 or 3 hours. And then at lunch, I would study for an hour. And then We would do a couple more lectures, and then I would study up until about 10 o'clock at night, and then I would get up the next morning at 5 and do it again. And I got up every Saturday. I got up every weekend, every 3-day weekend, everything. All I did was study. I realized after going to flight school, if I had gone to medical school right out of college, I would have failed out completely. I needed basic training, and I needed flight school to teach me how to do it. And it was basically just, drinking from a fire hose, but every single day you'd have to get in front of the fire hose. Like you just had to keep doing it. My wife is brilliant. She's really, really smart. Never got a B in her life. High school, salutatorian, all that stuff, which is funny because she was a salutatorian, so the second, even though she had the same GPA as the valedictorian, but I guess she didn't take one class that they took. So she's never gotten a B in her life, or never gotten an A-. She's brilliant, but she's also kind of lazy, and she'll kind of tell you this too. If there is a subject that doesn't interest her, she doesn't really care for it. And I think we're all like that. Like, I like Russian literature. I listen to my books on tape. I still listen to Dostoevsky. I like books, especially Russian literature. My wife doesn't, so it doesn't interest her, so she's not going to read it. The difference is there are a lot of stuff about medical school that I didn't like and that people don't like, but you have to learn it. And so my whole thing was, my wife, if she had gone through medical school, she could have, listened to it one time or read it one time and remembered it. It took me 2 or 3 times. But that was the thing. I was always going to work as hard as I could. The issue with medical school is, at some point in time, you say, there's always kind of that saying, you either have to work really hard or you have to be brilliant. You get to medical school and people do both. And so you'll meet the smartest people you've ever met, who also are the hardest workers you've ever met. And so I would say, I'll study 14 hours a day. Well, so will they, and they're smarter. So they're just going to get it better. So it's really tough. You have to do your gross anatomy labs. You have to go, you have to dissect all the cadavers. You have to do all the different labs. You have to
Real quick, I'm gonna pause and come back to that. When you say cadavers, you mean human beings?
Oh, yeah.
This isn't like the frog in high school chemistry.
No. So this is a cadaver lab. So it's giant tanks. You're broken up into a group of 6 people. You'll be talking about something like they'll be talking about the hand. And so your job is to dissect the hand. When you cut into like a piece of meat, maybe you find there are like little planes of fascia, like little planes of fat and stuff like that. But we're talking when you're dissecting a hand, you're separating every muscle, you're separating every tendon, you're separating every nerve, every artery, every vein, basically dissecting the hand so that you've got an anatomy book in front of you. When you look at it, that's what it looks like, is it's completely dissected down. And then what will happen is, in order to continue on, you'll have to have a test. So in like 2 weeks, you'll come in there and there'll be little pins poked in everything, and it'll be like, what's this nerve and what's this artery and what's this vein and what's this muscle and what's this bone, and you have to know it all. You get really good at it. You're really good at memorizing everything and then forgetting it pretty quick because you don't remember. There's just too much to learn.
But I assume if you specialize in that field, then you're going to become the expert in that when you come back to it.
Yes. The thing that's interesting about it is you have to know every muscle. Every muscle has 2 parts of it. And so like if you think about the bicep, it has to insert at some place where it has to start and it has to attach. There is a certain movement for the bicep. The bicep will only do a certain movement. You have to know every muscle. You have to know the insertion point, the origin. You have to know the blood supply, the nerve supply to it. You have to know what it'll do. And any of that's testable on there. And so it's just a lot of memorizing. If you put it off and you say, okay, well, we just started the foot. We won't even really get into the foot for like 2 or 3 days. And it's a Monday and the wife wants to go out to dinner and I haven't seen the kids. So you know what? I'm going to start studying tomorrow. You're like behind. Got to study that night. I would take a test and then start studying right after the test done for the next week. It's just, that's all you got to do is study. And I was not the smartest person in my class, which was always hard because I always had to study and study and study. There were guys in there, your cadaver tank, you get like tank mates. And there was a girl that was in there and she was just very, very smart. And I know it looked like med school was very easy for her. Maybe it wasn't, but she's just really smart. And then I had other friends, and the whole time I'm just like, man, it would be so easy if I was as smart as these people. It is what it is.
There's something to be said for that hard work, right? Everyone learns differently. everyone gets there differently. And if I had to guess, I don't know these folks, right? But if I had to guess, there's things that they struggled at that you probably, no big deal. By the way, I've been mortared in Iraq and know how to fly an airplane across the world, that they would be shocked and not a chance to even do it themselves.
So that's interesting. There's two stories there, but one of them was I went and I talked to the guidance counselor that was there because they'd mentioned that there was a psychiatrist that was on staff, and the psychiatrist specialized in sports related performance. He would talk to people about golfing strategies and stuff, like how to get the stress while they're trying to make a putt. And that was his big thing, was this sports psychology stuff. I went on up there to go talk to him, and I said, hey, I'm having a hard time on this, because I think I've got to get out of my head. I'm just really stressed out about this. And medical school, it's going pretty hard for me, whereas other people, it's not. And he goes, what did you get on your last exam? And I said, I got an 88 on it. And I studied my butt off for it. And I legitimately could have studied another 50 hours, and I wouldn't have gotten 100 on it because it was just too much, and I couldn't have done it. And I said, I got an 88, and it's just crazy. And he goes, well, what did everybody else get? And I said, everybody else in my tank, they all got 95s, 96s. They all did great. And he goes, what if I told you the average was 87? I said, well, I don't know how the average was 87. Everybody got A's. No, they didn't.
But that's what they told you.
But that's what they told you. And so
yep.
That's when I realized they were all faking it, a lot of the stuff. Nobody wanted to be the guy who got a B. And so I'm standing there I got an 88. And they're like, oh.
So you're doing
really?
Fine in reality.
Because I got a 97. I got a 96. Oh, really? I got a 98. And then you're like, well, the average is 87. So yes, stress is very different. Once I realized that I was with my maximal effort, I was with my peers, then I was like, okay, this is easy. But an interesting story. So when you have to apply to medical school, you have to do this kind of interview where they kind of pick up where you're at and stuff. And so I was over in Iraq at the time, and they allowed me to do it over the phone, which is crazy because there was one other person that they allowed to do it, and he was in Singapore. He had contracted some kind of communicable disease while he was over there trying to help out. And so he was in quarantine doing his master's work. I applied to a couple different schools that I won't mention, but they all told me we will not do over the phone interviews. You have to do them in person. So we're there, and I'm talking to them, and we're in this bunker in Kuwait. We were flying into Iraq every day, but technically we were out of Iraq because we pulled the troops out. So we were in Kuwait in this giant bunker, and every day we'd fly into Iraq, land, refuel, and then fly back. We're there, and I'm talking to this guy, and he's talking to me about how do I manage stress, and I'm giving him this kind of real benign answer of, I like to work out, and I like to do whatever. And then we got mortared. Or something happened where an alarm went off and the klaxon's going. So I guess we weren't mortared because we were in Kuwait, so it couldn't have been that. But the klaxon was going off. Something was going on base. And the people on the phone freaked out and said, oh, be safe. We got you. We look forward to seeing you next year. Just be really, really safe. So I think that part of the reason why I got accepted to med school was because this klaxon was going off when I was in Iraq, and it was the right time where everybody was super pro military.
You're taking fire, and they just want to get you home safe and get you into med school.
Exactly. And so
how many people walked, just big round numbers, and I'm asking you to guess or asking you to maybe remember. Let's say 10 folks walk in the door to med school day one. How many walk out the door as a doctor on the backside?
10.
10. Really?
So we had 200 people, and then we had 193. So you have to take board exams every year to continue going, which is one of the things about Caribbean medical schools and stuff. They don't make them take the boards. So a lot of the times those guys will graduate and they'll be a doctor, but they can't do anything in the States because they didn't pass the boards.
Doc, you're telling me there's a different standard. This is breaking news here, really.
Most of the time, too, though, the school knows that they will never be real doctors because they didn't pass the boards. So the boards are super hard, and they're tailored. At the end of the first year, they'll ask a question. This drug works on this kind of receptor, whatever. What kind of effect would you expect to see? And so it's a very straightforward. We want to know if you understand the mechanism of how this drug works. So very basic science question, just answer the question. Then the second year, when you take the boards, they'll ask something like, so-and-so has this particular symptoms. Can you identify the disease? And then if you can identify the disease, then what medication would you give them? It's like crawl, walk, run. But then when you take the boards at the end, it's kind of like, hey, so-and-so has this vague kind of thing. Can you pull out the symptoms? And then if you can pull out the symptoms, can you pull out the disease? Can you pull out the right testing you would order? Can you interpret the testing? And then, oh yeah, by the way, there are 4 different drugs that can do that. What's the most applicable drug for this thing? So, just higher level questions. In order to get to second year, you have to pass step 1. It's a very, very hard test. I don't want to say a lot of people fail it because they just don't. I mean, the guys are brilliant, most of the people who go to med school. And so what ends up happening is 1 or 2 will fail it, and you can't retake it. Maybe you can take it once, but they send you back again and have you redo the first year. So of our 200, 193 people graduated with us, but those 7, I know a couple of them got recycled back into the class, so they probably did graduate. And then there was only 1 or 2 people that just said, this isn't for me, I don't want to do this anymore. But nobody really fails out of med school. You basically have to give up, because if your medical school costs, let's say that cost $100,000, at Texas A&M we pay $12,000 a year. So somebody has to pay the other $88,000. And so it's the state of Texas that does that. And Medicare also pays for it too. So Congress has money for med school, and then the state does. So when they take 200 people, the state says, we want 200 doctors. That's what we gave you the money for. And so when they go to try to pick the people, not only do they want to make sure that they're smart enough to do it, but they want to make sure that they're going to stick with it, which is why they like aviators, why they like military, why they like nukes. Submariners do very well in med school too. But when you talk to everybody, everybody's done something. Like one guy was like a Division III national champion quarterback. One guy was a Division I national wrestler. Somebody played the piccolo. Somebody was like an international ukulele champion. But it all just shows that I've worked a lot of time on a talent, and I'm going to stick with it. When they take you on in and they say, here you go, here's medical school, they're going to teach you everything you need to know. You really don't need to walk into medical school really knowing anything. You can just learn it all there. They will spoon feed it to you. It's just, will you keep coming back every day? Will you study every day? And will you not give up? That's medical school.
It's funny, those the same skills work in aviation. Like you said, you've got to have that. If you don't love it, I can't make you love it. If you don't want to do it, I can't make you do it.
Yeah, it's not like art or some of these other things. Like I could, so I play the bagpipes, not very well. I think I could practice 2-3 hours every day for the rest of my life, and I would never be as good as some of the other people. I just wouldn't be. With medicine, there's an art. Surgeons, there's an art and there's stuff like that. But basically, we can all take the same textbook, and if we study long enough, we can all get the same knowledge out of it. And so there is a certain amount where, art and music and some of those things, it's kind of like, well, how good are you? Medical school, everybody can pass the boards. You can pass the thing. It's just how much do you want to study, which really is unfair, because if you're not a good test taker, and I am not a good standardized test taker, I had like a little mini panic attack when I realized, oh man, I'm like, this is my whole career. This is everything going on. Like, you need to do this. It's kind of unfair, because if you're not a good standardized test person, but it is what it is. It's what we have, standardized tests. So if you're not a good standardized test person, so if anybody's listening to this that wants to go into medical school, when they ask you why you didn't do fantastic on your MCAT or your SAT, do not say, I can't take standardized tests well, because your boards are standardized tests. So you're not going to pass them, so they won't take you. You can be as bad as you want at standardized tests, but you still have to pass the boards, and that's all they have right now.
Once you're out the door of medical school, you're coming back to, you're coming to the Navy.
Portsmouth Naval Hospital.
Okay. How long there in Portsmouth?
I was there for 1 year. I did my internship. I did what they call a transitional year. So you can do surgery, you can do emergency medicine, you can do OBGYN, you can do a couple of these internal medicine, or you can do what they call transitional, where you do all of them. So it's a little bit of everything. So you do some OB, you do some surgery, you do some ER, whereas if you're in internal medicine, that's all you do is internal medicine, or surgery, that's all you do. And so you get a very well-rounded kind of education, which is really helpful in the Navy, because they're going to send you off after your first year to make you go do a job. So I don't think a lot of people know it, but when you get your flight surgeon, you get your general medical officer, your GMO out there on a ship, or you get your dive officer, they actually just came out of medical school. They did 1 year of internship, and then they're showing up, and it's like, here I am, I'd like to help you out. So there's that. We kind of joke around too that being a flight surgeon, you're enforcing the standards of the Navy aviation, and then also you're holding the referral pad to, hey, you got something real, let's send you to derm. Hey, you got something real, let's send you to cardiac. So we send you on around to places, and then after you've done it a little while, then you get your confidence, and you do that, and then you go on out. So So transitional year, so I did that for a year, and then I came here. They tell you can either go on a ship, be a general medical officer, you can go be a dive officer, or you can do a flight cert. And since I figured, oh, well, I'd love to come back and be able to do flight school over again because I think I'd rock. I mean, I was number one in my class the first time. Let's see how it is the second time. And then I showed up and they said, oh, no, you don't get to go to flight school. You already fly helicopters. You will go sit over there and go do physicals. So I got stuck over at NAMI doing physicals. So they all go off and do the flight portion, and they come back and we do the medical portion where we learn all the stuff that we need. So while they're waiting and they're doing their flight portion, I'm here at, in Pensacola, and that's when I got colon cancer. Worked out great. It was right in my appendix. I'd probably only had it for a couple weeks. And then they removed my appendix, did an appendectomy, went back in, checked the lymph nodes. They were all good. And so they said, no chemo, no radiation, nothing else. You're good to go. NAMI, so it's interesting. So we have this waiver guide, and waiver is basically we have a standard, and you have to meet the standard. You have to be 100% within the standard. If you're not, you're considered disqualifying, and you need to get a waiver to allow you to still fly. If you get abdominal surgery and get your appendix out, you have to be grounded for 2 weeks. If you have colon cancer, you're grounded for 2 years. So the debate was, what exactly did I have? Because they removed my appendix. And while they removed my appendix and did an appendectomy, and yes, they found cancer, is it an appendectomy or is it colon cancer? Because colon cancer is 2 years, appendectomy is 2 weeks. Now, colon cancer usually requires chemotherapy, radiation, extensive surgeries. There's always a chance too that when they have to remove so much of your intestine that they can't rejoin it, and so they have to make an opening and you have to have a colostomy bag. There's a lot of things that can go wrong with it. Mine was so minor and so quick, I thought I should be under the appendectomy part. They thought I should be under the colon cancer part. We came to a happy medium of, if I stay here in Pensacola with my oncologist, I can go back to fly. So I got right out of flight school. I was stationed here to fly a VT-10.
Talk about someone that sees, again, I as a naval aviator, right, someone who's flying, I only see the one side of it, which is, hey, I want to keep flying. I'm going to do I'm actually, when we're done with this, going to go keep doing some sea duty screening paperwork. I'm showing up, doing these appointments, making sure that everything's good to go before I can go do that, being on a ship. But by the same token, you see behind the curtain. And so you can see, I know what the waiver guide says, and I know what actually happened to me. And yes, this makes sense to me, but then I also have to convince that organization, like you said, NAMI, that governs us all to make it work. Man, what an interesting spot. First off, I'm glad you're okay. Yeah. I'm glad that it was as minor as it was. How did they catch it? Was this just a routine thing?
No, so I caught it myself. Appendicitis, it presents in kind of a weird way. Usually, everybody kind of knows you have a right lower quadrant pain, but it doesn't actually start that way. So 2 days before, you get this generalized abdominal pain where it just kind of doesn't feel right. And then over a couple of days, it'll locate to that right lower quadrant. So once it travels on down, you got it. You're like, oh, okay, it's right there. The other thing too is you have anorexia where you don't usually eat as much. I was sitting there and I was trying to put my little guy to bed and I was rocking him in the chair. And I told my wife, I said, you've got to do this. I can't put him on my stomach. My stomach is really hurting. And then I thought to myself, and I'm like, wow, abdominally wise, everything kind of hurt. And now it's just my right lower quadrant where I'm holding the baby in the rocking chair. And then on top of it, my mom's been in town and we've been going out to restaurants and I haven't really eaten anything. I'll have a couple fries and maybe a bite or two of hamburger, but I haven't really eaten. And then I was like, I think I have appendicitis. So I started doing all the things. I started moving my leg and started doing all the stuff. And I'm like, no, it's there. So I called up my friend who was at the hospital and I said, hey, I've got appendicitis. And he goes, well, the Navy hospital, you can go to the Navy hospital here. They don't do surgery. The Navy hospital is very interesting here. It's an urgent care and clinical. And so they said, you can go there. They don't do surgery, but we can give you antibiotics, which is what they do in Europe. Europe, they don't do as many surgeries. They do a lot of antibiotics and see if the infection clears, and then they don't need to take out the appendix. Or you can just take out the appendix and be done with it. There's always the hypothetical discussion of when you go up to space, how do you write with a pen in space? And so we figured out this multi-million-dollar way of having a pen write upside down, and the Russians write with the pencil. Well, what do you do with if you have an appendectomy or you have appendicitis in space? The Russians take their appendix out before they go, perfectly healthy, so you can't have a problem if it doesn't exist. So they do that over in Europe. They give them antibiotics, and so I was like, you know what? I've got a break. I might as well just do surgery because I don't want to get on antibiotics and then have it be a problem. And so let's just get it out. So I went to the ER, did a CT scan, took some blood work and said, yep, it's appendicitis. So then they removed my appendix. The next day I was back home walking around. Well, we take everything that we remove, we send it off to pathology just to make sure. And as a med student, I will honestly say that I always thought it was a scam because only certain things. But I was like, wait, so we're going to send this appendix down? The pathologist is just going to tack on $1,000 onto insurance, and then there's nothing wrong with that appendix or their gallbladder. Well, make sure it's not cancer. It's not cancer, it's gallstones. But sure, we'll send it down. I send all my stuff that I removed to pathology too because that's just what you were taught to do. We always do it because you never want to have a problem. Well, like 5 days later, the surgeon called up and said, hey, your pathology came back. And normally I would ask you to come into the office and we do a follow-up and I'd break the news. But since you're a doctor, I'm just going to tell you, you got cancer. It was in your appendix, but it looked like we got it all. But we got to go back in and take out some lymph nodes and make sure it hasn't spread. So I went back in, they took out some lymph nodes, and that was it.
Is there any way to know where it came from or what caused it?
There's no way to know. So I do VA disability claims on the side. I will tell you that with the PAC Act, and I forget what the PAC Act stands for, I actually know the acronym. It's the burn pit bill. It is a presumptive condition, GI cancer. Also, one of the planes that we flew certain missions, and I did fly them for many, many years. And there's a lot of electromagnetic radiation on it. It's hard to say what happened, but I do know that in my unit, a couple of us all came down with cancer in our 30s, which is very, very unusual.
And so I hope that anyone that out there, this is just me editorializing for a brief second here. Yeah, if you have questions about that stuff, like trust a medical professional. Like you were a medical professional,
Yes.
so you could trust yourself and your knowledge. But
Yes.
if you wonder, if you don't know, like you said, there's resources to help, especially for veterans and folks that have been exposed to that stuff.
And aviators it is a commonly known fact that aviators have a higher incidence of cancer, whether it's the UV radiation being higher, whether it's the chemicals, whether it's the exhaust, whether it's anything going on in the aircraft, but much higher percentage.
For sure. Well, again, I'm really glad. I don't know that I've spoken to a whole lot of cancer survivors. I'm very glad that it ended the way that it did. And you are where you are now. That's awesome. But moving forward from there, you said Navy kind of a little bit of time. You're going to spend some time here in Pensacola. But you talked about going over to VT-10. So you're all qualled up. You're ready to go be a flight surgeon. What was it like being at VT-10?
It was actually really nice. So I will tell you that when I got there, skipper was super nice, super helpful. And they said, hey, do you want to go through the FIT-U? And do you want to try to go fly with students? I thought about it and I said, no, not really, because I don't really want to fly with students. I like to fly, and if I go down to the FIT-U, not to like go through the syllabus, but just to go fly with them, I don't have to like put in a flight plan. Like I just say, hey, we're gonna go fly. Can we go fly to Lake Charles? Can we go fly to Chenault? And it's like, okay, well, we'll put it all together for you.
For reference, this is why we like flying with flight docs, is we know it's a good deal for you and it's a good deal for us too.
And then I go out in the plane, and yeah, sometimes it's like, yeah, I'll work the radios, or sometimes it's like, no, I don't want to work the radios. Like it's great, and then you just get to fly it. I like flying with the FIT-U instead of flying with the guys upstairs because you get put on like some tail chase or some kind of like thing. You have to fly with what the other students flying, whereas down at the FIT-U, it's like they schedule a flight for you, and so it is pretty fun. So I always got my flight hours. I always flew all the time. It was a pretty good deal. I really like flying with VT-10.
What was it like compared to your Army flying? Not just, I mean, I'm talking about RC-12 was an entirely different mission set than an orange and white T-6 flying around, training NFOs, training backseaters, but kind of is there anything you can compare and contrast since you've seen both sides?
Yeah, so that T-6 is tiny. It's tiny and it's not comfortable, and I don't like wearing gear. It was funny because I flew at Whiting just the other day, and I had to put on all my gear, and I thought, oh yeah, I forgot we had to put on gear and to fly helicopters too. Flying an RC-12 is awesome. You bring your pubs, but even then the pubs are usually inside the aircraft. You walk out there with like an iPad or a newspaper and a lunch and your Bose headset, and you just get on in there and you adjust your seat. We had a guy in Iraq that was like crazy into fitness, and so he would bring exercise equipment up there in the back of the plane. So he would get up and go do push-ups in the back. He'd have these like isomeric bands because you're up there for like 6 hours, and he'd be like working out in the back. Somebody always joked around about bringing up an exercise bike in the back so that they could get their cardio on. Not in a T6. I always wondered though too, like what happens if you have to go to the bathroom? It hasn't come up yet in a T6, but I thought, man, and there's no autopilot. You can't just give it to you can when you're flying with an instructor because your autopilot's with you.
We have piddle packs. You better pin the seat before you use it. I'll just say it that way. I always fly with them. I have them in my G-suit, left G-suit pocket always, just in case. I've lent some to other people, usually when you're flying IP, so they can use one. But yeah, I've not had to do it yet myself. Anytime you're walking to the flight line, airplane, don't pass a bathroom without going into it and using it.
That's the thing too, is that there's no autopilot. Even in that King Air, it's so aerodynamically stable. If you don't even turn on the autopilot, but you just trim it up right, you can just leave it there and it'll fly where it's supposed to go. The T6, not so much, but then again, I'm not that great at trimming it up, so maybe that's on me, but it seems like it wants to fly all over the place. You guys also fly way too close to each other. That's crazy to me. So we're flying out of Istanbul, and I'm the company commander, and for some reason they thought we were a different type of aircraft than we were. We get put in this line, and I would have loved to have had a picture of it, because it's these huge commercial jets that are flying from Istanbul to like United States. And then there are 3 little RC-12s. It took us like an hour to get on the runway. I remember even thinking, we should probably refuel before we go, because this is taking a ton of fuel just sitting here waiting. But we get on out there and it's raining. In the Army, the way that you do it is you put on the brakes, you give it max power, make sure that everything's okay, and then you release the brakes, and then you go. Every now and then you can go on the roll, but they don't like that. For whatever, I'm trying to remember why we don't do that. It's our time to go out there, and there's 3 of us, and it's raining. And they go, RC-12s take the runway, and you clear for takeoff. And I'm like, no, we go one at a time. You got to like space us and stuff like that. And I'm like talking to them, and they're like, take the runway. You guys are holding everybody up. And so we're like, okay, well, we'll take it, and we'll just kind of all go one. We'll just kind of space ourselves out. Start applying power, and plane just starts going. We're literally hydroplaning down the runway. The guy next to me, he's like trying to slam on the brakes, trying to stand on the brakes. And I'm like, let the brakes go. We got to take this on the roll. We got to go. Tower's yelling at us. It's all this craziness. And so we take on off, and then like 30 seconds later, the next guys go, and the next guys go. And we had to like file reports, and that was like a big deal. You guys put your wings like right next to each other. It is crazy looking out and seeing a plane there. That's too close.
It's a lot of fun to drag someone through the weather. It's a lot more fun when you're a lead and they're on your wing. When you're -1, when you're a lead, all you have to do is be a stable platform. Nice and slow turns, everything's nice and gentle. When you're -2, when you're on the wing, it can be a significant emotional experience when it gets a little bit thick in a cloud. And I've had several times where all I saw was a wingtip. We don't have a radar. We don't have any of those things, right? We're doing this the big air quotes here, the old-fashioned way. But it's also a tremendous amount of fun. Like, helicopter guy, we would not snuggle up and go through the weather. In the airplane here, the right training, doing it the right way with the SOP and all that stuff. Yeah, you can do it. It's something that's, we're trained really well down in the FITU, like you talked about.
The first couple of times you're like, why is that plane so close? That is nuts. Like, it should not be there. And I don't think you guys have TCAS. Maybe, oh yeah, you guys do.
We have TAS, and it is remember T6 Alpha, right? So it's the original version of that system. ADSB, right? The iPad and ForeFlight and all that stuff. Yeah. Way better. Yeah. It's almost a pseudo mini radar with, it's not a radar, but a lot of limitations. But yeah, you have a lot more presence, and you know what's out there in the airspace.
Turkey's an interesting place. So I know we're talking about med school and stuff like that.
No, we can go back and forth.
But as a fun aside, when I was in med school, we didn't have a lot of money. And so I won this scholarship, the Tillman Foundation Scholarship. Fantastic organization. They gave me some money. Astronaut Johnny Kim got it, and a couple other famous people all got it. It was really, really helpful. So when I got the award, Texas A&M had me go speak to a bunch of like boosters and stuff. So A&M has got a lot of money, and their football team, while they haven't been doing great this year, and it doesn't really matter when you listen to this podcast, because if you listen to it in 2027, our team's still not doing good. They don't reach their potential for the amount of money that they have. So what they wanted to do is, at one of these football games, they wanted to bring in all the boosters that donated these millions and millions of dollars, and then bring in the med school and try to get us to get them to donate money to the med school. So we get there, and there was like a guy who was like a cheerleader. We don't have cheerleaders at A&M. We have yell leaders, but he's this guy, and he's talking about how great it is to be a yell leader. And then somebody is talking about some kind of patent they were working on for some biochemical thing that was so boring, and I couldn't even understand any of it. And everybody's like got their phones on, and they're all looking at it. Then it's my turn to go talk to them, and it's the Pat Tillman Scholarship winner. They pull me aside and they go, they're dying out there. They're not going to donate anything. Like, do you have a good story from when you were flying? Because if you have a good story, now's the time to break it out. So I said, I've got a story. Let me tell you about Turkey. So I tell them the story. Apparently we got a bunch of money. They donated a lot of money. Maybe they were just going to do it anyways, but I like to think that, me talking to them, because afterwards they all came up and were talking. But so I'm the task force commander. So there's about 10 to 12 of us pilots that are over there in Kuwait flying into Iraq every day and doing the mission. I am a captain, but I'm filling like a role of an 05. But I used to have to go to these like department meetings. There was like a 1-star Air Force guy there, and then a lot of 06s, and then there's me. And if you've ever deployed, you know that you're supposed to grow out the stupidest mustache that you can. And so I had this stupid mustache. It was bad. And I remember thinking, I can't believe I'm sitting here with all these guys with this stupid mustache. So much higher, ranking job than I should have had as being an 03. And so I'm there, we're getting ready to start going home. And as we're starting to pack up all of our stuff, and we're going to put it all on a boat, and we're going to fly the aircraft out, and we're going to do all this stuff like that. But we're supposed to leave like in 10 days. And I'm sleeping in the middle of the night, and some guy comes running up from the skiff, and he's telling me, hey, there is somebody from the White House that says they need to talk to you. And I'm like, well, take a message or whatever. And they're like, no, I don't think you understand. It's like from the White House. And so you need to get down there. I go on down there, and like, it's some guy who's not even under chain of command, not anything, but I mean, he was in the skiff. So I figured he knew what was going on. And so he goes, when are you guys leaving Kuwait? I said in 10 days. He goes, it's not soon enough. You guys got to leave tomorrow. I'm like, well, no, it doesn't quite work that way. Like, this is a spy plane. Countries don't like you coming into their country when you're not supposed to be there. And so, no, we have State Department approval to go there in 10 days. So we'll go in 10 days. You need to be out of there tomorrow. I don't think you understand. We don't have permission to go into Turkey. We don't have the ability to go there. And so they're like, well, you guys got to get out. So I go call our command, and they're like, yeah, you guys got to get out of here. We get on out there. The planes are actually ready to go, more or less. And so we're gonna take off. And so we fly up there in northern Iraq, and we land at the civilian place. And we had paid these guys. So the whole time to get on home, you have to pay off all these people. It's not like a bribe, but you have to like pay for protection every place you go. The Peshmerga, I think that's what they call them, but they're like the militia, and they are going to protect our aircraft and refuel us. So we're sitting there, we're refueling. They've got a bunch of guys walking around with AK-47s. We're inside this small like little area, and we're watching the news, and President Obama comes on and says, we no longer have any troops in Iraq. And so we're like looking, and we're like, well, we are still in Iraq. We're like, hey, this is kind of weird. So we're still trying to talk to Turkey on a satellite phone as we're going. Like, hey, we need to change our clearance, but we don't have like approval to go into Turkey. At some point in time, somebody knew somebody at the State Department, and they said, oh yeah, just so you know, anybody caught in Iraq at this point in time is considered to be like rogue. They're not supposed to be here, because the president said we have no longer troops in Iraq, and we're sitting here with 3 spy planes in Iraq. So we start hearing all these radio chatters, and everything's going on, and the Peshmerga guys come running in and say, you guys got to get out of here. They're breaching the base. They're coming on the airfield. There's a lot of stuff going on down there. People are shooting and stuff like that. You got to get out of here. We don't have a place to go. We can't fly south, and we can't fly into Turkey. Where do you want us to go? And they're like, we can't hold all these guys off. Like, you can see them down there. And so you look on down, and there's something going on down there. And we're like, well, we got to go. So we get out there in our planes. We spin them up. They tell us, you are not cleared to take off. You are not cleared to take off. You are not cleared to go. Stand down and shut down. You are not cleared to go. And we're like, you're an Iraqi controller. Like, we're going to go. Like, we're not going to stand here and whatever is going on down here. So we see them all down there. And this guy's like screaming at us, like, don't take off, don't take off. And so we're like, well, we're going to take off. So we take off anyways. It's right there next to Turkey. So I'm like on a satellite phone in the back of the RC-12 as the pilot's flying, and I'm sitting in the back, and I'm trying to call Turkey, like, can we come into your airspace? And they say, you are not cleared to come into our airspace. If you come into our airspace, it is an act of aggression, and you will be shot down. So we're like, what are we supposed to do? We can't go back. Can't go forward. I don't know what we're supposed to do. We contact the State Department, and they say, yeah, it sounds like maybe we've got a clearance code for you. It's the original one that you used, but it's like 10 days early, but it should work because we talked to them and they're all good. So it's almost like, in that Star Wars thing where it's like he gives them the old code and he goes, it's an old code, but it still works. It's a code, but it's not, not really. I tell the other 2 guys, it looks like we'll fly into Turkey and see what happens. And so we give them the clearance and stuff like that. And then we fly in. And I will tell you, at the time, I was 70% sure we were going to get shot down. It wasn't even like hypothetically it's a possibility. Like, I was pretty sure we were going to get shot down. And, the whole, you make your peace, you say a prayer, and it's like, we're going into Turkey. And so We flew on in, landed without really any problem. But the second we get there, they pull us on in and they want to see all our paperwork and they want to see everything. So we do all this stuff and then they tell us that we're not allowed to go. We're like stuck there. We're like, okay, well, we're going to get out of here now. So we refuel. Like I said, I'm more of like a ask for forgiveness and instead of permission. So we're not supposed to go. But we're on a military airfield and I don't really care. They can be upset, but we're on an American airfield, so we're going to go. The next day we get ready to go and we take off and we fly into Istanbul. Everything's great. We had our agency, our like little FBO that handles us, our handler, and we stay at this 4-star, like, this just amazing high-rise place, and it was just great. I ate like 3 or 4 pounds of baklava. It was just awesome. So we were there for like 2 days, and then we come back in, and they said, oh, hey, by the way, you got to go into customs. And so we don't think anything of it because it's customs. And as we're sitting there going through, because you got to go through customs to then get on a little car to drive out to your airplane. As we're sitting there, the guy goes, where's your stamp getting into the country? And we're like, oh, we came from the military base. And he goes, yeah, I know, where's your stamp? And we're looking, and none of us had stamped into Turkey. And this is causing a big problem. He is not happy. He's upset. Police start coming around. They start bringing all these people and stuff like that. And so our handler's already left us because he's going to go get the car on the other side. And he's just an FBO guy. It's not like he's some government official or anything like that. Finally, we get a hold of him. We call him back, and we're like, hey, they're not letting us get through this. Like, this turned out to be a big deal because we don't have our stamps. Like, what do we do? He goes, there'll be a guy that'll come and he'll be wearing a blue shirt. Tell him. I'm like, okay, great. Maybe it's some translator or something like that. And so this guy comes and he's got a blue shirt and he's in front of all these people. There's the customs guy, there's the police, there's all these people. We've all handed them our passports. They see that we don't have any stamps. He walks on over there, collects our passports, hands them all back to us, and then he opens up this little pack and pulls a custom stamp out and stamps all of our paperwork right in front of everybody and says, you're cleared to come into the country. And then he stamps us on out, and then we walk right past everybody to this plane. And we're like, what the heck? And so he was like a former State Department guy for Turkey, and he just bought the stamps. Apparently you can just buy them from the government for like 20 grand and then you're a customs agent. So he stamped us in and stamped us out. Now I didn't realize though, when you landed at like an FBO here, I don't think you like pay them money, but the Peshmergas guys it was like a $30,000 contract. We paid them $30,000 to land. In Turkey, I think it was 50 grand and they did it. When we flew into Greenland, it was like 30 grand. So you pay these guys a lot of money and they're supposed to make problems disappear, and that's apparently what they did. And then we got on the plane, we had the whole hydroplaning incident, and we got out of Turkey, and then that was it. Could have been a lot worse.
It could have been a lot worse. I don't even know how we got here, but that was quite the story.
Yeah.
And I can understand why the folks at A&M liked it as well. That's incredible.
There's a couple things that maybe the general public don't need to know, but there was some more shenanigans. It was a lot of fun, and looking back on it, it all worked out.
We're back here. We're back to VT10. How long were you in the job at VT10 as a flight surgeon?
So I was there for about 3 years.
The reason I mentioned that, for those that aren't necessarily familiar, VT10 is the initial primary flight training for folks that are coming into the Navy to be a backseater. So think of, I hate to say it, Goose. I guess it would be Bob these days in the back of the F-18. Not all of them have Coke bottle glasses. In fact, some of the students I've flown with were CFIs, civilian flight instructors on the outside, right? Like they could have been, could have gone pilot. They ended up getting picked up for NFO instead. Really, really great guys and gals that we fly with. But as the doc, I don't know the right way to say this, and we're going to talk about it here later. You kind of stand between them in some ways, between them getting out the door. And, we always say that aviation medicine, the docs that I've ever interacted with in the Navy have been, I can think of one exception. I'll tell you that story offline. Every single one has been awesome. They want to keep us up. They want to keep us flying. They care very deeply about our medical health and readiness, all the good things, right? And even the one exception I'm talking about, this person just seemed to be kind of enjoying a vacation in Bahrain as opposed to wanting to keep our aviators in the air. Yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, I've had nothing but good experiences, but you are maybe not the first touch point, but maybe the second or third, right? They've gone through NAMI, they've been medically cleared, now they're in a flying squadron, and that's your job, is to keep them medically up so that they can keep flying in the airplane and keep proceeding on. What was the job like from your perspective, probably your first touch point now as a flight surgeon at a aviation squadron in the Navy?
It's really interesting. I know a lot of people, NAMI is the Naval Aerospace Medicine Institute, and so Aeromedical Institute. And so the thing about it is, NAMI has two purposes. One, it's to ground aviators and not let them in the program. and the other one is to help them to fly safe. So when you try to come into the program, if you've got something wrong, like your vision's not to standard, you've got some kind of cardiac problem or whatever, before we've even spent any money, it's NAMI's job to identify you and not waste government resources on you. They call it the NAMI whammy. Basically, NAMI has, one of the purposes is they are trying to save the taxpayers money, and they're trying not to put people through that are unqualified or are going to have problems. Sometimes it gets into a little bit of an issue, like we'll have some like vision problems where they'll identify that somebody has the predilection to have a problem, and then it becomes a hypothetical. Do we let them come in knowing that there's a higher percentage that they're going to have a problem later, but they don't necessarily have a problem now, and they might not have a problem, but we usually say that it's an 8-year contract, so when we're bringing them into the program, we try to make sure that the military can get 8 years out of them. So if you can show literature that at 10 years they have a severe, they have a severe degeneration of their vision standards, they will take them in because they're going to get their 8 years out of them. Maybe not a whole 20 years, but that's kind of what they're trying to do. Then once you're in and you've got wings on, now it's NAMI's job to get you to fly. They are trying to protect now the resource, and they're trying to get you to fly. So a lot of the times when we give people, downing chits for things like, I had barotrauma or I had a problem with my ear, the intent is to ground you so that we can get the problem taken care of so you can come back on flight status. The whole point is to get you to fly. It might not seem like it from an aviation standpoint, but it's to get you back in the air to fly safely. At VT10, it's a weird kind of place that you're at because they've already passed and they're already getting some training, but we haven't bought them yet. They don't have their wings yet. So it's almost like you bought a car and you've got like 2 weeks and you can return it. Well, it's like, I don't know, like this guy's causing us more problems than it's worth. Maybe we should send him back. Or, no, this is a really good card, a really good deal. Let's try to like make it happen. What I have noticed is most of the students, they don't want to share a lot of stuff, but the staff does because the instructor pilots do because they want to get out. But the instructor pilots are weird too because they all want to go fly for the airlines. So they don't want to divulge too much and let you know too much because then they hurt their job prospects and out there in the future. And so it is a very weird kind of unit to be a part of.
That's a really great perspective. I hadn't thought of it exactly that way, but it makes total sense. I'm never going to tell anyone to lie. But one of the things that I was taught very early on was don't tell too much. And I guess I'll give an example, and that would be, and I'm talking to a flight surgeon now, so you can shoot me down if this is the wrong thing to say. But, for example, I know a lot of people that, when they were a little kid, the form that you're filling out, right? There's all these potential things that, have you had literally anything that you could ever potentially have wrong with you. And a lot of times people recollect and they want to be honest. And they want to be extra honest. Oh yeah, I think maybe I was on, I'm going to use something, ADHD meds, or maybe I had this or that happen when I was a little kid. And it was like, well, no, were you diagnosed with it? Did you have treatment? Was it something that you saw a doctor for? If the answer is no, you didn't, so therefore you don't need to say yes to that on the form. And I think at least the way it's been explained to me, a lot of people have said yes to things that actually were really a no, but they've caused themselves, like you talked about on the front end, a little bit of additional work. I'm talking at it from the aviator's perspective. Maybe you could hit me with the NAMI perspective on that.
It is the diagnosis that drives the decision. What'll happen is you'll get a guy who has a hard time breathing. Like my little guy right now, he's got allergies and stuff like that. And so if you run him around too much, he has a kind of a hard time breathing. But if you let him wait a couple minutes, he calms down, he's fine. If you take him into the doctor and say, hey, I think this is what's going on, they will give him an inhaler and they will say, you probably have asthma. But then when you come into NAMI, NAMI says, whoa, you cannot have asthma and be a pilot. So we don't diagnose asthma in kids until they're usually like 8 is the earliest I've heard of. We call it reactive airway disease. And so reactive airway disease is something's going on, you're reacting, but we're not going to label you with asthma because sometimes kids outgrow it and stuff like that. So when people say, I have a history of childhood asthma, first of all, do they really? Because in order to get a history of asthma, you have to do a pulmonary function test. Nobody does that. So do you really even have it? And then secondly, did you need it? And so this happens all the time with ADHD medication because ADHD medication is you can't fly. Obviously, if you can't pay attention to a task, you're not going to get a good scan. We don't want aviators who have problems with ADHD flying. They'll get medication because everybody gets it. Well, they have to come off of it at some point in time. So if you can show, I went to college and I never had any issues, I never had to have special accommodations and I graduated, then we would say, okay, well, you probably didn't have it. You were probably overzealously prescribed it. So it's hard because people like to prescribe stuff out there. So you don't want to share too much. An example is sleep apnea. So a lot of times people have a hard time understanding, but sleep apnea is caused by like an anatomical obstruction. So something has to physically block it to be obstructive sleep apnea. So usually it's your tongue or it's fat and muscle around your neck. So there's an anatomical obstruction. Well, if you tell me, hey, I don't sleep very well and I snore at night, you might have sleep apnea, but you don't have it until you're diagnosed with it. Once you're diagnosed with it, you have to get a CPAP machine. You have to be compliant with it. You have to wear it for 5 hours a day for greater than 70% of the time. There are standards. You saying, well, I think I might have sleep apnea is very different than a diagnosis of sleep apnea. And I will tell you that I do veteran evaluations on the outside. You'd be surprised how many people go in for a sleep study and, it's normal. Yeah, you just snore.
And not to put judgment on, folks' lifestyles and the choices they want to make, but, if you drink, if you are overweight, there's plenty of other things that, like you said, you might have it. You might need to find out the actual medical answer to that question. Or maybe it's lifestyle choices you can make, and potentially that's going to solve it too. I don't know, but a medical professional has to answer that question, not me.
And it's interesting because sleep apnea is one of the hot button ones out there. So it's a very different population. So when I work with veterans, most veterans want to say, hey, I have this claim. Some people, they are really banking on their VA disability as their retirement. They want all their disability. They want to get 100% so they can live in their mom's basement or they can do whatever. Everybody's got their own reason, but some people really want it. Well, sleep apnea, if you drink a lot of alcohol and you put pillows on both sides of you so that you can't roll over, so you fall asleep on your back. If you elevate your feet up a little bit, you will 100% have sleep apnea on that test. If you go on Reddit and you find somebody in your neighborhood that will do your sleep study for you, you can have 100% sleep apnea. You can get your wife to do it. You can get your friend to do it. You can do whatever.
All the things you're describing, by the way, are 100% against the rules.
Completely. But it's interesting because with aviators, you never get them trying to get evaluated for medical things. It is always, oh no, doc. Everybody's joking around about me snoring, but I've snored since I was a kid. It's not sleep apnea. It's not what it is. Until they get ready to retire or whatever like that. But it's a very interesting group being with pilots because they're all what we call reverse malingering. They're all doing whatever they can to stay in the cockpit. And it's very, very different. It makes it great as a doctor because that's the population you want to work with. They want to come back to flight status. They want to get better. They want to do all this stuff. They care about their health. And so I think working with pilots is the best. That's why I went into aerospace medicine because I'd like to stay working with pilots.
Well, I'm kind of glopping it all together. Talked earlier about the NAMI whammy. Again, for folks that maybe aren't familiar with the term, when you come down here to Pensacola, you might have been assessed. For me, it was, I think a MEP station. Then I was assessed at OCS, and they said, yep, thumbs up, you're still good to be a pilot. And then I came down here to NAMI. And the only vote that matters is NAMI.
Yes.
All those other places can say whatever about, let's say, depth perception or cholesterol, any other thing, right? But the only voice that the Navy cares about is NAMI. Why is that? And I was hoping maybe you could kind of talk us through that process.
They also have what they call an anthros chair. They have specific anthropometric measurements, and only NAMI's chair matters. Even though you've got it done whatever, it's here. So everything is here. This is the place. You have to pass it here. One of the interesting things about medical school, I did my first semester. I got A's, B's, and C's, but only for the first semester. After second, third, and fourth year, we went to pass-fail. It was just pass-fail. And the whole reason was because we would get people from Caribbean medical schools or smaller schools that they would pad their stats and everybody would have a 4.0. So then when you would go and apply for jobs and residencies, they would say, oh, wow, well, this guy has a 4.0 from this school and wherever. This guy's only got a 3.2, but that guy has a 3.2 from Harvard or, Texas, at A&M. And so
I was waiting for you to say that. I knew it was coming eventually.
Of course. So the thing is, we all have to take the same boards. So why don't we just make the boards count? So it doesn't matter what your home doctor does. It doesn't matter what anybody. There is one vision guy for all of the Navy here at NAMI that assesses the standards, and he sees everybody. NAMI is the only place. We have a psychiatrist, and you have to come through NAMI Psych. You have to come through NAMI Vision. You have to come through NAMI. So basically, they just ensure that everybody meets the exact same standard. So even though you're a doctor, which we have all the time, we have people bring in personal records from their ophthalmologist, or they bring in personal records from their dentist or whatever, and they say, nope, we don't care. This is the standard. This is what it is. I would like to say that the standards are based on good empirical scientific information. Unfortunately, I don't really believe that they are. So when you try to go get a medication for cholesterol, they have to show you, we have done the work, we have tested people, these are the results, this is the scientific data. We can 100% say that if you take this pill, 92% of the people will they'll lower their blood pressure by so many systolic points. Here is the data, here's what it is. NAMI, we don't really have that because we don't really really track people when they go away. So if you fail the vision standard and you go off and you go become SWO, we don't track you anymore. So we don't really compare you, or you might become a nuke and we don't really know what happens, or you might go on in the civilian world. So we don't really have a control group to compare them to. But what we do have is experience. That vision guy has been doing vision because we do have a lot of civilian people who stay here a long time, but our vision guy has been doing it for like the last 10 years, and he's probably going to do it for another 5 years. Then when he retires, he'll do it for the next 20. And he can tell you, this is the standard, and when we don't enforce the standard, I've seen it, and it comes back, and these people get kicked out, and then now we've lost money. We have a lot of historical data that shows this is why you come here, this is why we do it. It frustrates people, it definitely does, because when some guy will bring up, and the new ophthalmologist that he has that just graduated from medical school will say, well, this is crazy, why don't you use this procedure? Well, we don't have that procedure, and we haven't been doing it, and we don't have enough historical data to say that procedure is going to work. So even though your civilian guy is saying, I could fix this by doing this, it's not waiverable.
It doesn't fit within that Navy system that we have already established.
Yes.
And I'm assuming, kind of like anything else in naval aviation, we have conferences where, as aircraft, I'll use the analogy of aircraft and people here kind of together. As aircraft age, right, different things break, different things need to be looked at, and so we have a standard, and that standard changes over time because we learn more about them. I'm guessing it's the same thing here. NAMI is not frozen in 1940 or 1950, or maybe it is, and I don't know the answer to that. But things change. I'm guessing, is there a process that you all can evaluate things and say, actually, hey, these are new, again, with as much data as possible, best guess is probably the right way to say it. Is that something that happens as well?
Yes, it is. And there are some people who are pretty critical about NAMI, and the people who are critical about NAMI think that we should have one tri-service standard. They think that the Air Force, the Army, and the Navy should all have the exact same standards, and we don't. They're a little bit different. And then other people will say, well, yeah, but the Army doesn't pull any Gs, and so they don't have anything that pulls over 1.2 Gs, so why should they get a say in what the F-18 guys can do? And then the Air Force, it's great. You fly the same jets, but guess what? You don't fly them off an aircraft carrier, so we don't want to hear what you have to say. When you're in residency, you're here in aerospace medicine, one of the things that you have to do is you have to update the waiver guide. And so somebody is always checking to make sure that all of our waiver guides are pretty much the same with minor kind of things. So if, like the new weight loss drug, diabetes drug Ozempic, if the Air Force all of a sudden approves it, then the Army and the Navy will say, well, wait a second, they approved it. What do we need to do? We need to at least address it. They're constantly doing that. But also in residency, you come through, and one of the things is you have to update the waiver guide. One of my projects was I updated the hypertension waiver guide standard. So it's going through its process of being changed. But back in the day, before I did the project, we did not waive people who had hypertension as applicants. If you came in at 22, 23, and you had blood pressure that was above 140/90, and you said, hey, I need to take lisinopril to lower my blood pressure, we said, nope, we haven't bought you, we don't own you, we don't do anything, you're already having problems, see you later. Try diet and exercise and come back and try it again. The Air Force and the Army says, yeah, we don't really care. If you take lisinopril, we don't really care. As long as you meet the standard 140/90, it has to be lower than that. We don't care as long as you're only taking losartan or lisinopril. As long as you're taking one of these three medications, and only one medication, we don't care what it is as long as it's within standard. So part of the thing is, how many people have we not brought into the military or into the Navy that haven't met that standard? We have 2 services that take it and ours don't. So we kind of worked on coming up with a plan. We now will take applicants who have blood pressure, but we still want to see them, and make sure that, because hypertension is kind of a weird thing, because Navy tries to be more helpful to the aviator. I mean, that's probably my bias, but if you are a 22-year-old that has hypertension, there's probably something going on there, and so you need to get it looked at, whereas the Air Force is like, we don't really care. As long as you meet the standard, you're good. The Navy says, if you do come on in, you have to get this looked at and this looked at and this looked at. And let's make sure that we see why your blood pressure is elevated before we give a waiver.
And there's probably some long-term second and third order level consequences too on what we're going to pay for that person afterwards, let's say for medical benefits and things later on in their life as well.
Yeah, which is interesting because when you're talking about NAMI and you're talking about all the flight stuff, we actually don't care about money. We don't care about a lot of that stuff. The only thing that we really care about is, first of all, coming in the door. Are we going to get your investment out of you? And then after that, will it cause sudden incapacitation in flight? If it does not cause sudden incapacitation in flight, it can be waived. If it does, it's considered disqualifying, and we need to find a waiver to do something. So if you have an arrhythmia inside your heart, and every now and then an arrhythmia, like especially if it's like AFib, will cause a clot to break off, and then you'll have a stroke. If that happens in the aircraft, that's catastrophic. So if you have AFib, we look at it and say, you are not qualified to fly. but we can put you on medication. We can even do an ablation. We can do a couple things. And once the risk is gone, then you can go back and fly. So it's kind of different, but that's what we care about is sudden incapacitation in flight, not necessarily the money or the treatment or paying VA benefits and stuff like that. We don't really care about that. We just want to know, are you going to be safe?
I am incredibly ignorant on the Army and the Air Force's standards, but one thing that I do very much appreciate about the Navy standards, I think you mentioned the NAMI waiver guide. I've had folks, and this might surprise you, maybe not, at air shows come up to me and say, hey, my vision is this. I'm taking this medicine, usually ironically for ADHD. Can I join? Can I be a pilot? And so first off, my job is to be the emissary of the Naval Aviation there and say, hey, I don't know the answer, but I know someone that might be able to help you. And oh, by the way, look up the waiver guide. And so I think it's really nice that that's out there. Not so much that those lay people can necessarily interpret their own medical condition, but hey, for example, I'll talk about vision. I had a vision question before joining the Navy, and thankfully I was able to take the waiver guide to and I'm going to mess it up, optometrist or ophthalmologist, an eye doctor. We'll just say an eye doctor, and said, hey, sir, here's what's up. Here are the rules. I want to join the Navy. Is this going to work? He, as the expert, was able to interpret what you all here at NAMI put out and say, oh, yeah, ma'am, you're good. No worries. Don't worry about it. And then thankfully everything worked the rest of the way. But again, I don't know if the other services do that or put that information out, but I found that, just this is me editorializing here, I found that so incredibly helpful that folks can read the book and understand. We talked about the other services, the Army and the Air Force specifically. Do they do that as well?
They do, and I will tell,
Does it drive you nuts, though, that people, hey, this is what the paper said?
No, not really. So if I had to rank them all, the Army is not as robust as the Navy because they don't have a lot of the different things. And so when you fly a helicopter, you're always flying two people inside the aircraft. So things don't have to quite be as strict. If you did have a stroke and you were in the helicopter, well, the co-pilot would take over. But if you have one in F-18, you're screwed. So the Army is less robust, but not because it's not good. It's just because it doesn't need to be. The Navy is good. The Air Force, though, they do something really weird in theirs that's fantastic. They tell you how many people applied for a waiver, how many people got the waiver, how many people were told no, and how many people were told to wait. So if you're like, this hypertension thing, I don't really know if I'm going to get a waiver for this thing. This is crazy. You can look, and it's a couple years behind, but it'll be like, okay, in fiscal year 2020, 15,000 people applied for a waiver, and they granted 15,000. Oh, okay, I think I'm going to be okay. Or when they have 4 people that applied and 0 people got it, you're probably not going to get your waiver.
Is that something you think the Navy might ever learn from, let's say, and that's something we might ever bring over to our side of the house?
Yeah, it would be nice. It really would be nice to track some of that stuff. One of my jobs is working with the waiver guide, so it'd probably fall on me. So probably don't see it happening anytime soon.
Line of sight tasking. Yeah, well,
anytime soon. But no, I'm just kidding. Somebody else, I'm sure. But anyways, it's nice because when we do, we kind of look at it. We kind of look at the Air Force. I don't know how they have the manpower to do that because NAMI's very stretched thin.
I was about to say exactly that. I've not been to Wright Pat, and that's their center of excellence, right, for all that. Have you been up there? And is it, I'm guessing, just like 2, 3, 5x the size, that many more people? Is that the difference between the services?
So it's a 5 or 6 story building. It's all like glass and nice, and they have a library and they have a cafeteria.
Golf course, I'm guessing, probably putt in there somewhere.
No, I remember at lunchtime I would get my lunch and watch everybody out there. It's huge. They definitely have a lot more space and they have a lot more money and they dedicate a lot more of it to it. But I would say too, so the Army, they don't really have a lot of money to appropriate because it's a small part of the Army. The Navy, it is too. I mean, you got these ships and you've got all this stuff like that. Aviation is it. The Air Force, that's what they do.
Absolutely. On the other side of it too, we talk about NAMI, you are not just naval aviation. It's all under the banner, right? The Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Coast Guard. So we're talking about, like folks that are in some very, going to compare reproductive organ lengths here, but we'll just say probably some more demanding environments, so less resourced, which is kind of, again, an interesting combination, but somehow naval aviation makes it work.
I think the Army does a really good job, and I think they try really hard, but there is it's a huge Navy, and there's only so many resources. And the other thing, though, too, is I actually got called this morning, one of the moonlighting jobs that I do on the side, and they said, hey, a veteran was turned down for his VA disability. He would like to talk to you. And I'm like, is he going to talk to me? And he goes, I think he wants to yell at you. People are always like angry when you tell them no or you tell them whatever, and I don't think that they really understand. I don't remember that veteran in particular, but I'm pretty sure that what happened was he probably had a legitimate condition and then he had military service and he thinks that his military service is connected, and then just sometimes it's just not. If I was to tell you that my friend is laying out every day in a tanning booth and so he's got cancer, you would say, oh, well, he's in a tanning booth. Of course he's got cancer. Yeah, he's got lung cancer. Tanning booth, UV rays will cause skin cancer, but not really lung cancer. He thinks it's the sun exposure, not the 2 packs a day that he smokes for the last 50 years. So I think the problem is that people don't really like hearing bad news, and there's always got to be a bad guy, even though legitimately, if you thought about it, you kind of understand. I will tell you that I know I kind of got around NAMI by staying here to fly, but I thought legitimately my condition was not impacting safety or doing other things like that. And NAMI is pretty reasonable when you talk about stuff like that. But there are some times where a guy will come to you and say, I know I've got this condition. I know I can't see out of one eye, but let me just tell you, this is what I can do. And I talk to this person, I have this plan, and the military just looks at it and goes, it is just not worth the risk. And so I'm sorry, but no. And then they walk out saying, stupid NAMI, they're just screwing over aviators. When if you've really thought about it legitimately, we've talked about it, and I know that I really want to be an astronaut. That's my dream in life. But I will tell you that the last 2 astronauts that they picked in my position, I would have picked them too. Like, if I'm being honest with you, they're pretty amazing. They're fantastic. And Neil and Johnny, I would have picked them over me too. And I think that if people really legitimately thought about their medical condition and didn't think about, oh, this screws me from flying the airlines, this is going to screw me out of this job, this is going to do whatever. But if they thought that's probably what should happen, that's probably the safest course of action.
That is a level,
don't like to hear that.
Yeah, and that is a level of maturity that's really challenging to reach, and to truly set, to look at yourself from that dispassionate third party and realize it's hard to sever the emotional connection, I think.
Yes.
Sometimes someone else has to do that, and sometimes it has to be you that has to do that. I'm guessing you've probably told people great news that, hey, congrats, you're going to go start flight training, and you've probably also given them the NAMI. I don't know if it's you specifically or someone.
Yes, I have. And so we actually have a psychologist that works here. I asked him, I said, so do you ever get kind of like happy or excited when you give people good news? Because it's got to be nice to tell somebody, hey, you thought your career was 100% over and you got sent over here at NAMI Psych, and you've already started sending out resumes for working at local high schools kind of thing, because you're never going to fly again. And I get to come in there and tell you, nope, you can go back and fly. You're 100% cleared. And he said, no, I don't get excited or sad. I just enforce the standard. It's not personal. He had a diagnosis that when we talked to him, it wasn't substantiated, and so he can go back and fly. But I don't feel any happier than I do when I have to tell the other guy he can't fly. I try to be consistent. And that's one of the things when I do VA evaluations, I actually record every medical opinion I do, and then I look through them. So when a guy says, hey, I was exposed to a burn pit, now I've got multiple sclerosis, I'm like, well, I've seen 17 people like that, and I found this way in 14 of the 17. I'm going to probably find the same way just to be consistent, because unfortunately giving whammies or giving them up chits, all you're doing is enforcing the standard. My medical opinion doesn't change. No matter how nice that person is, it doesn't really change.
You talked about NASA, and I didn't want to wait too long before we talk more about it. It's one of the greatest joys of my time here at VT10. We had a class of ASCANs that came through the program. I got to fly with a couple of them in the T6. Really, really great folks. I know you've had a little bit more of a personal connection with NASA than I've had, so I wanted to hear all about it, and then obviously the application that you're doing right now.
I remember as a kid, I told everybody I either wanted to be a doctor or a pilot or an astronaut. Just thought it would be awesome. My wife is a saint. She's like, it's so funny too, because when you get married, you don't really think about a lot of this stuff. I never once thought that my wife was super supportive. You fall in love and you marry somebody. You don't think about, oh, what's going to happen in 10 years from now when I want to switch careers? Is she going to be supportive or not? You just fall in love and you get married. And then I just happened to get incredibly lucky. But I remember coming home and telling her after 9/11, I think we need to join the military. I guess it was more like after basic training when I came home and said, I want to do active duty. I think we need to join. 9/11 happened. We're going to go to war. I think I need to join. And then I remember telling her, hey, I want to be aviation. And she's like, what are you talking about? Just yesterday you were military intelligence. Oh, yeah, but I talked to a guy at a football game. Okay, if you want to do it, then go ahead and do it. And then I remember, oh, you're fixed wing now. You were going to go get a tattoo of a Black Hawk and, all this other stuff. So I guess you're aviation now. I guess you're going to do fixed wing. And then calling her and saying, hey, I'm not happy here in Baghdad. I don't want to be an intelligence officer. And aviation falls under intelligence. So I was like, I don't want to do this when I stop flying. I want to go to medical school. And she's like, yeah, no, okay, we'll do it. I will tell you that the whole medical school thing was 100% just a waste of time if I didn't get into med school, because I already had a bachelor's degree. So taking organic chemistry classes, taking physics, doing all that stuff, it wouldn't have helped me at all. If I didn't get in, it would have been 3 years of hard work for nothing. And so she was super supportive of it. When I told her that I wanted to be an astronaut, she said, before you say yes, let me let me weigh in on this. So we have a deal that if NASA calls, I'll at least ask her before time, but she'll say yes. So I've always wanted to do it. It's always been a dream of mine. I never thought that I had the education to do it. You have to have a degree in STEM, and so it has to be a master's degree or it has to be a medical degree. And so I meet that. Eagle Scout, speaking Russian, 3 tours to Iraq, and then helo and fixed wing, and then medical. And so I think I have a lot of things going for me. So when I did this aerospace medicine residency, we had the opportunity to go out to NASA for a month and go work with them on a research project. So I did that, and then I also was the academic chief. So you have certain residents that are kind of like the chief resident. You hear about them all the time on like Grey's Anatomy and stuff. They're the chief, and so I was the chief, and I reached out to all the to SpaceX and to NASA under the guise of, hey, we need to further our education, which we did. But basically, hey, here's my name. I'd like to talk to you. Can we get NASA to come on out, and can we do this and set things up? And so I kind of reached out to a lot of people and started trying to build those relationships.
People look at, I would say, organizations like, I'll just use Naval Aviation. And I'll be honest, even before joining the military, all I had was books or maybe folks that I knew, and I tried to learn every little bit that I could. And then even so on the backside, now that I'm in here and so fortunate to have earned the gold wings, I realized a lot of what I knew ahead of time was not even close to the reality of it. And in a good way, by the way. Things have been better, in my career than I could have imagined. Same with that NASA logo. When people look at it, they think of landing on the moon, they think of the space shuttle. But a lot of people haven't even had that 1 month behind the door like you've had. What are kind of some of the things that maybe surprised you, maybe misconceptions or things that you thought one way, but then when you got to work with those folks, maybe you learned something about it?
So NASA has like no money. I was very, very surprised about that. They have like no money. They use their money to train a lot of the astronauts to do stuff, but I was surprised at how little money that they had. Like one of the projects that I worked on was the Aura ring. Some of the people wear this like tracker ring that you have on your finger. It tracks your sleep. They kind of envisioned the fact of when you go out and do an EVA, it would be really nice to know if that person got adequate sleep, because he's about to get into the thing, or she's about to get into it, and she's going to get dehydrated, and it's exhausting. You have to pre-breathe a bunch of, you have to denitrogenate yourself, and it's a big process, and it's hot in the thing. If they find out that you only had 2 hours of sleep, maybe they need to postpone it for a day so you can get some better sleep. And so it tracks a bunch of other different metrics. I was surprised that the ring cost like $300, and they had maybe 20 of them, and they were all donated by Aura. They didn't have the budget to really buy them. They didn't really have the budget to track them, so they were asking people who were there to do the research project for them. And then on top of it, we found out that the ring couldn't really work without a smartphone, without a bunch of different hacks. It had to go through Chinese software. So it would make more sense to buy the Samsung one. And they said, but we don't have money to buy any. These are the ones that were donated. So I was like, yeah, but you're NASA. Like, you guys have an unlimited budget. They rely on a lot of colleges that do a lot of the research. They do stuff. The money that they spend, they have to get value out of it. It's not like they're just cheap. They choose their projects because there are literally thousands of things they could work on, and they don't have the money for it. They have like 2 or 3 guys that handle the rocks, and yeah, you could be doing all kinds of experiments and stuff, but do you actually get any kind of value out of it? I was doing a research project with another guy who was a doctor out in town, a civilian guy, and he proposed something and told NASA, hey, just so you know, I've got Dr. Weipert. He's from the Navy, and he's working on it too. And NASA actually called me and said, hey, are you working with this guy? Don't work with this guy. And I was like, okay. And they go, yeah, he's throwing your name out. He's putting your name on down here and stuff like that. There's no issue with what he does. He's a legitimate doctor, a legitimate researcher, but we've invested a bunch of time and money into 3 of his projects, and we've got nothing out of him. So he throws a lot against the wall to see what sticks, which is what research does. But just so you know, NASA, we give you a couple times, and then we don't have any more money. And it's like, we try to help out the public, we try to do whatever, but we don't have a budget to keep funding this guy's pet projects that don't produce anything. And that'll be the same thing too. Even if you're with a drug company, you only have so much time working on a drug when it's like, hey, this is not profitable, let's move on. So I was surprised at how little money they have at NASA. The other thing I was surprised about, it's the bias of being the medical guy, how NASA doesn't think about the astronaut per se. They don't think about that. It's all about space. So when you try to go buy a car, you're going to make a commercial car that you're going to do, and you were to build the thing, and you would say, hey, wow, this is fat. Screaming, 900 horsepower. It can do all this stuff. It's got all these super safety features and everything like that. And you're like, okay, but where does the driver sit? Oh, in the back seat on the left-hand side. But he doesn't have access to the steering wheel. Does he need it? That's kind of NASA. They build the rockets, they build the technology, they build everything, and then you're like, you got to put a pilot in there, right? Like you got to put people in it. Well, yeah, we'll just have him like cross his legs for 3 days. It's like, no. I was surprised too, because there's lots of different parts of NASA, and so they're really good at building things like rockets and stuff like that. Not always best about comfort and about all that other stuff.
You got to have someone advocate for those specific things.
And that's what the flight surgeons do.
So I feel like every so often in the news, I see that NASA is accepting applications for the astronaut program. I'm trying to remember the last time that I saw that, but I feel like it's been a couple of years, which makes me think it's probably coming back around sometime soon. But I also get the feeling I'm talking to someone that probably knows that way better than I do.
Yeah, it's 2020 was the last one. They usually pick every 3 years. So you mentioned earlier having an ASCAN, or the astronaut candidate. So it takes them about 2 years to train them, and it takes them about 6 months to finalize everything and to select them. So they're in 3-year cycles. So 2020 was there. It should have been quick. It should have only taken, 6 months, but then COVID hit, and so it got delayed and it got dragged out. Problem is that there is no age. I mean, there's a minimum age, which I don't have to worry about, but there's no maximum age. However, there is just a kind of understanding that they're not going to take somebody that's too old. They won't say it, they won't print it, and I don't even know when it's discussed, but there's a certain time where, you're just too old to do it. What's interesting though is that if you kind of think about it and you add everything up on your fingers and toes, and you think, okay, so we need this guy to speak Russian. So somewhere along the way he should have learned Russian fluently, and then we need him to get a bachelor's degree, and then we want him to get a master's degree, and then we want him to go to medical school, and then we want him to be a pilot, and then we want him to do a residency. So how old should he be? About 42. Johnny Kim seemed to have done it a little younger. He was younger, but I still don't know how that happened. But he was younger because he's in his 30s. But for the most part, most of the people are right around 40, and I'm 45. I think I also flew longer than most of those people did. Because it was an 8-year commitment, so it took a little bit longer to do that. And then Johnny never actually did a residency. He started emergency medicine and then got picked up, so he didn't do a residency. So there's that. But yeah, they're about ready to start the application process again. It should be here in the next couple months. You should hear about it again. Most people apply multiple times. I applied the last round. Didn't get quite as far as I thought I would. From talking to a bunch of the astronauts, apparently maybe I didn't do very well on the personality test, but the personality test is kind of weird because they're not normal questions. They're questions that both have 2 right answers. One of the examples that I like to give people is if something is due by 1700 on a Friday afternoon, do you turn in an 80% solution on time, or do you turn in a 100% solution the next day late? Well, you can make an argument for both, but there's no real space to write it. You pick an answer and you go with it. And so I don't know exactly what the test did. I heard from some people that said the military didn't do very well on the test. The civilians did a little bit better, but whether they used that or not the next time, I don't know. But you have to meet all the qualifications, then you have to pass that part, then you have to pass the credentialing part where they check out all your references and make sure that you're a viable candidate. Then you have to pass the interview, then you have to pass the medical, and then you get selected for one of the 11 spots. For me, there aren't 11 spots because I'm going to try to do the medical spot. So they usually take 2 medical doctors, maybe sometimes 1 medical doctor.
I have to ask, what was your answer to that question? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
Okay.
But I will tell you that as a military person, I would have said it has to be done by 1700. That's
80% now. Yeah, exactly. That's the first thing that came to my mind. Yeah, it would be better to have something now than nothing later, and late is later. Late is later. Listen to me. Later doesn't even count, right?
Yeah, what is it, great is the enemy of good enough, or whatever it is?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I guess we don't really know what's behind the matrix or behind the wall.
So I will tell you, in the Army, they did a kind of an interesting test, and this is all anecdotal because I never worked in it, but what I heard was we had to take a test, and it's been about 25 years, but they would ask you a question like, what would you rather do, have a toenail removed or have a root canal? What would you rather do, race a motorcycle or race a boat? What would you rather do, go to an air show or go to a tractor pull or whatever, a monster truck? So there's no right or wrong answer. But what they did was they pulled a bunch of pilots from Vietnam and they gave them these questions, and then they all kind of fit in this thing. So if you answer the right way, you're in the group. And so I was told that when you take the test, pretend that you're some guy from Alabama, from lower Alabama, taking this test. Don't answer it like a guy that grew up in San Diego, because in San Diego I'd say a motorcycle, but that's because we didn't really race boats. We didn't go out on lakes. And so I don't know if that's the right answer.
No, it sounds a lot like the phrase you'll hear in the Navy, ducks pick ducks. We're picking people that match the same group that already did it, but did that group do well? Did that group not do well? I don't know, but if you pick more of the same, you're only going to get more of the same potentially.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting, and so, but the difference is with the Army is that was something that was factored into your score. It wasn't the gatekeeping step. And I will tell you though that when people would try to go to my unit and they would be warrant officers and stuff like that, if the group had a certain religious, political, a certain Second Amendment backing. Like if you came in and you said, just something like off the wall to that group and you said, I think that we should turn in all of our guns and I think that we should just fall back under the United Kingdom because the Queen knows what she's doing, you would not get picked up in our unit. They would say, or,
yeah, there might be a good reason why that is.
Or it would be like, hey, guys, can we stop going to Chenault every day to go eat and stuff like that? They don't have any vegan options. They'd say, well, your vegan option can go down the street. Whether that's right or wrong, but you're right. You got to fit in within a certain group. And so I would say, though, that it seems like now there's a lot more initiatives where we try to broaden our horizon because maybe there is a better way of doing things. But the military is a lot better about that now than they were. And I hope that that's the same thing with NASA is they're looking for maybe something to broaden their horizons. And so maybe there's a reason why they did what they did.
Getting back here to the current job and what you're doing here for the Navy, how much more time do you have here at NAMI?
Well, I have 3-year orders. I'm at 23 years. So if I don't get picked up by NASA, the plan was probably to retire at 25 years. Our little guy, he's in the EF&P program, the Exceptional Family Member program, and I think we got him into a really good school. And so we were actually just thinking today, maybe we finish out the 3-year orders to give him 3 more years in the 3 years in the school, see if that'll help. But if I'm being 100% honest with you, and I didn't have, my wife always hates it when I say hypothetically, if I wasn't married and didn't have a family.
Wow, it's funny. I say that too, and my wife doesn't like it when I say that too, Doc.
So the goal of my residency is to go off on an aircraft carrier and be the senior medical officer, to be the SMO. I would love to end my military career on a high note and go off on a carrier and be a SMO for 2 years. That would be awesome. I think it would be very detrimental to my family right now, and I think that it would hurt my little guy's progress and my daughter. And I know why we're here, but yeah, that would be awesome to go out on a high note and be a senior medical officer.
That makes sense. And I mean, you're doing, it's that constant balance, right? A lot of times people ask, hey, why did you get out? Or if someone chooses to get out, right? Everyone has their own reasons. At a certain point, you have to make the transition to it's all about me, to it's all about, we, not me. You're looking after your, like you said, your family. And that's what is more important in life than that. So I, as a person, again, I'll editorialize a little. I used to be a little bit more judgmental about people, about why they would make certain decisions. And then now having a son who's not that old, he's still pretty young. I don't know, you start to realize that you're looking out for more than just yourself. But no matter what, you've done awesome things here for folks. I, just because I want to say I know an astronaut, I so very much hope that that's the phone call that you get when you apply, and that's what happens. But I want to end all these interviews with number one, gratitude. Thanks for taking so much time and talking through all this and letting us see behind the doors of NAMI and a little bit about your career. But also, you get the last word. Anything maybe I didn't ask you about or anything you want to say? Over to you.
I never thought that I would be where I'm at now. I know I'm still inside the military, but having switched careers from being a pilot so many times to different platforms and over to medical, that without a supportive wife, there's just no possible way that I would do it. It just couldn't have been done. I think too that as we were talking a little bit earlier about what's best for the family, we would go to Iraq for 15 months, and then we'd come home and we'd be there for 10 months, and then we'd sign paperwork to allow us to go back early again. And in between that time, you'd spend in Sacramento and New Jersey, and then just doing all this other stuff. And I never even thought twice about it. I was like, well, it's war. It's what it is, Family will come later. When our daughter was probably 6 years old, I think I'd only been home for about 2 years of it, maybe 3 years. And so I just missed so much. And so it's just one of those things that when you're gone that much, your wife is really the one that picks up all the slack. And we've been married 23 years. I would say that I always joke around with my wife when we hit 10 years and stuff. I would joke around that, oh, now you get half my retirement. But in all honesty, my wife's probably done more for the military than most people have on active duty. It's always nice to remember just the sacrifices that they made. But I also think too that there have been a couple people that have been put in my life in certain places that without them, it never would have happened. Without a mentor that got me, that helped me get into medical school, I don't think it would have happened. Without a lieutenant commander that was our battalion commander when I said, hey, do you mind if every Monday I miss 4 hours to do organic chemistry, and he said, sure, go ahead and do it. Without him, there's just no way it would have happened. And so just very, very lucky and very fortunate and stuff like that. And so it's funny looking back on life. You look at all the places that you've been and how everything kind of played out. I'd like to cap off my career by being an astronaut too. I think it would be amazing. I think it'd be great. But if it did happen, I could look back and say, wow, it's like all of these jobs totally got me to where I need to go. And then if it doesn't happen, I would say all these jobs got me to be the person that I am, and it got me to where I'm at. You know, I'm getting ready to retire in a couple of years, but you're really not that old at like in your mid 40s. And so there's a lot more, you know, life to do. And so it's kind of interesting kind of thinking about all that stuff, but it's been a fun ride and it's been a lot of fun. So
Like you said, it's not over yet.
yeah, not even close. When I was talking to my wife about some stuff, she said, you know, if you don't want to go be a SMO because you're worried about how it's going to impact the family, why are you trying to go to NASA? And I said, well, it's a lot like when we were going to Iraq. I didn't think about the family as much as I probably should have because we were at war. We were working towards something. Now it's kind of like, well, you know, it's really hard to justify missing my son's, you know, T-ball game because I'm processing a waiver or I'm sitting in a meeting or doing something like that. And so I would say that if given the opportunity to go work for NASA, I think that, yeah, we would make a little bit more sacrifices because it's a little bit different.
I hope that's what you get to do, and I look forward to hearing more about it soon.
Okay,
Cool.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Todd.
Thanks, as always, for taking the time and tuning in to Safe on Deck. Hope you enjoyed this episode. It shouldn't need to be said, but just in case, I'll say it. The views and opinions presented on Safe on Deck are my own and those of my guests and do not represent the official policy or position of the Department of Defense, the Department of the Navy, or its components. Be well, blue skies, and fly safe out there. See you next time.
PCL idle, wings level, deploy over safe on deck.